Timothy was sure that the world hated him. The streets of the cozy mountain town were filled with people going about their business. When people saw their friends, they would greet them, ask how they were doing, and a small conversation would start between the interlocutors. A girl was running down the street, trying to catch up with her mother. Her mother turned around and asked her not to run, afraid that she might fall. But all the conversations immediately disappeared when Timothy walked by. The women hugged their children close and the adults moved some distance away. Now, all the passers-by tried not to look at the guy in the torn cloak carrying the sack. Timothy heard everyone around him whispering about how he was the corpse collector. The guy did not react to the voices around him or the people staring at him. His path was straight to one of the shops. The shop owner was not alone and immediately asked why the corpse collector had come to visit him this time. The other customers were in a hurry to leave the shop because they didn't want to be in the same room with him, but Timothy wanted to sell something. He poured the collected jewelry out of the bag onto the table. The store owner was unhappy, calling the finds garbage. The man threw a few bronze coins on the table with contempt and said that Timothy had had enough. He had to leave, but the guy was amazed at the price. He was offered only 20% of the regular value, and he wondered why. The store owner was not going to answer him. Instead, he grew outraged, saying that the corpse collector had no right to say anything. In this world, danger lurked at every turn. People could face monsters at any moment. However, there were also those who hunted these monsters. Such people were called adventurers. High-ranked adventurers mined expensive materials and fought monsters every day to level up. A slight difference in levels made a huge difference in power. Level was the foundation of this world. And it was in this cruel world that Timothy's adventurer level was 1. After the boy received his reward at the store, he headed to the market and asked an old man he knew for bread, as he always did. The old man greeted him and handed Timothy a package, saying he had prepared some bread he couldn't sell. This was not the first time this happened, but it was a sin for the boy to complain. He paid for the goods offered. His grandfather said that maybe he should find another vocation and quit his job as an adventurer, but Timothy replied that he couldn't do that. He had already gained a reputation as a notorious corpse collector. No one would agree to hire him. He had long wanted to become an adventurer, but after his dream came true, he learned about his curse. 0 experience. He turned out to have a rather unusual skill, or rather a real curse that was impossible to fight. No matter how hard he tried, he failed to gain experience. His level didn't rise. It seemed like Timothy couldn't get any stronger thanks to this cursed skill. But he didn't give up. The boy believed with all his heart that he would one day be able to improve his level, but the system was relentless. After a while, the boy finally lost faith in his abilities. Then he started collecting materials from the corpses of monsters. He had nothing to do with killing the beasts. They were killed by adventurers, and that's how Timothy became a corpse collector. The materials from first-level monsters were very cheap, and the guy needed to look for better monsters. Collecting small things in the wake of the adventurers, Timothy knew he couldn't last long. While thinking about this, he didn't notice that he had crossed the path of a group of young people. He lost his balance. Timothy couldn't hold on to anything, and he dropped a piece of bread, his last meal, and fell to the ground. The leader of the adventurers stepped on the bread and said with disdain that the bastard was a corpse collector. The adventurers crowded around the leader and Timothy with arrogant smiles. Everyone in this town knew him by that repulsive nickname. Because of it, he couldn't find another job. He couldn't understand why this was happening to him. But no matter how much he was despised, he couldn't stop searching the corpses. Otherwise, he would simply die of hunger. Moving through the goblin's cave, the boy hoped that he could find something worthwhile here. Suddenly, Timothy smelled a strong, unpleasant odor and saw a giant dragon corpse that had already begun to decompose. As he got closer, he realized that this monster was about level 200. But now was not the time to think about it. He had to gather materials. Timothy would probably be able to make good money. The boy examined the body and realized that many expensive parts were already gone. He was left with a putrid sack. An organ that, in the case of monsters of this category, was usually avoided because of the very strong, unpleasant odor inside. But Timothy didn't care. He made his living digging through corpses. When he cut open the bag, he realized there was something inside. The guy made a bigger incision and, to his surprise, found armor inside. As soon as the armor was freed from the tissues of the dragon's corpse, The cave was suddenly filled with red lightning. The guy realized that something bad was coming, something he wouldn't be able to cope with. A voice in his head ordered him to put on the armor. Timothy realized that the voice was coming from the armor itself, which meant the object was dangerous and he needed to get away as quickly as possible. But as the boy was heading for the exit of the cave, he suddenly saw a bunch of goblins preparing to attack. Timothy couldn't figure out where they had come from. It turned out the corpse collector had been rather inattentive. While preparing for the fight, he realized that his opponents were of the same level as him, but he didn't have good equipment. The goblins, meanwhile, rushed to attack, some of them armed, and Timothy realized he was about to be killed. The corpse collector could not believe he would really die in such a place, having achieved nothing in life. The guy didn't understand how, but he was pushed back toward the armor, and the voice started to sound in his head again. The voice insisted he put it on. Timothy decided that, in any case, he was not going to live, so he had nothing to lose. He shouted that he was willing to put on the armor, which in his mind was better than being killed by goblins. The system confirmed the wearer's consent and activated quick dressing. Surprised, Timothy looked back in the direction of the armor, which began to emit lightning toward him. A few seconds later, in front of the astonished goblins, the guy was fully equipped in the armor of the abyss, ready to fight. Timothy, looking at his new armor, wondered if the armor of the abyss was truly on his side. The armor replied that it would unconditionally follow the boy's orders. The boy, preparing to repel the goblin's attack, believed, unlike his old sword, which had been knocked out of his hands, the blade he held now was much better. The guy realized that the goblins were of the same level as him, but with this blade, the corpse collector had a chance to survive. After slashing a couple of enemies, the guy suddenly felt a surge of energy in his armor. He didn't understand what was happening. Timothy felt that with each kill, his body became much lighter. He became stronger, as if it were not his body at all. Finally, believing that he could survive and win, the guy shouted that all his enemies would now come to an end. After the fight ended, a strange light from the corpses of the enemies began to penetrate Timothy's armor. The guy didn't realize what was happening until the system announced that his level had increased. Surprised, Timothy looked at the message in front of his eyes and could not believe what he was seeing. The system notified him that the owner's level had been confirmed and had now increased to level 6. Timothy didn't know how to feel about this news. He had already grown used to not being able to gain experience points. He looked around at the remains of the monsters that surrounded him, wondering what this meant. At that moment, the system notified him that thanks to the armor of the abyss, he was able to use the level absorption skill. It turned out that Timothy could really raise his level without gaining experience. In fact, this strange armor allowed him to absorb the levels of his enemies. He wasn't imagining things. He was actually getting stronger and faster all this time. By now, Timothy had already gained 5 levels in addition to his first. He could really become stronger. The guy was overwhelmed with joy. This incredible news was a blessing. His dream was coming true. The smell in the cave was awful, but it didn't matter. Thanks to this dragon, Timothy had been able to level up. Suddenly, the boy realized that if he overcame all the enemies in this cave, he could become even stronger. Putting his hands to his chest, Timothy thought it was likely that his enemies wouldn't be able to hurt him thanks to this armor. If he used all the advantages of this equipment to its fullest potential and killed all the goblins, he could easily achieve his goal. But the guy's thoughts were interrupted by a strange feeling of someone's presence. He didn't even realize there was an enemy behind him. Looking around, he saw a giant goblin, but he knew that there shouldn't be any strong monsters in this cave. Still, the boy's eyes couldn't deceive him. He was looking at the goblin lord himself, surrounded by his subordinate minions. Timothy did not understand how the highest-ranking goblin of level 35, the defender of this cave, could have come here. The boy realized that he urgently needed to run to the exit of the cave, but behind him, smaller goblins had already begun to eat the dragon's corpse. The guy realized the goblins were attracted by the smell of meat. The system alert recommended retreat immediately. Timothy understood this perfectly well, but he was unable to do so. All the exits were blocked. The goblin lord struck his first blow. The guy had to accept the fight. He tried to hold back the heavy onslaught of the enemy with both hands, but the resistance was useless. The goblin lord was extremely strong and easily threw the boy deep into the cave. It was difficult for Timothy to get up. He struggled to get to his feet, but he had no choice. The enemy had terrible and lightning-fast force. Although he had managed to raise his level, he was still too weak, and tears flowed from his helplessness. Timothy decided to take the opportunity to escape. He was still unlucky, but he managed to get away. The whole time he was running toward the exit of the cave, but it was carefully guarded by the army of the Goblin Lord. He thought he was still too weak and considered waiting in a safe place until they left. But one of the goblins was already flying at him with an attack. It was then that the boy realized the goblin was only level 1. The guy grabbed his opponent by the head and slammed him into the ceiling. The level 1 goblin had no chance against him. After destroying the enemy, Timothy realized that in this world, everything was decided by level. Even this useless goblin must understand the difference between them, just as the boy understood the difference between himself and the Goblin Lord. The system notified him that the level was absorbed, and the owner's current level rose to 7. If Timothy continued to absorb levels, he would be able to defeat the boss. Now, he was forced to kill to survive. A fierce fight broke out, and the level 1 goblins were destroyed one by one, unable to resist the boy's strength. A few minutes later, it was all over. Only the strongest remained in this world. Heading deeper into the cave, the boy reasoned that only those with a high level of skill would be able to survive. The weak would always obey the strong, and the boy knew this from his own experience. Having destroyed the level 1 goblins, Timothy absorbed their powers and was promoted to level 15. Suddenly, after walking a bit further, the guy saw illuminated side caves and the system recommended exploring them. Following the recommendation, in a few minutes Timothy found mountains of treasure hidden in the dungeon. Stunned, the boy wandered among the piles of gold and realized the goblins had stolen all these treasures from people. Ordinary people would not have been able to handle even the level 1 goblins, so perhaps there was something useful here for Timothy. After walking a little further, the boy found a box and wondered what was inside. When he opened it, the system informed him that it was probably a recovery potion. When he took out one of the vials, he was convinced it was true and decided to use it in battle. As soon as he thought about it, the system notified him that his armor had a special place to store potions. In a second, all the vials were automatically stored on the guy's belt. This discovery turned out to be very useful for Timothy, and he thanked the higher power that brought him here. The guy really wanted to take at least some gold with him, but he realized it would hinder him in the battle with the boss. The main goal was to return to the city alive. If he succeeded, Timothy could get rich by selling materials from the monsters. Having finally gathered his thoughts, he decided not to waste any more time and set off to meet new adventures and challenges. Suddenly, when he was almost out of the cave, he heard someone's voice and went to follow the sound. Behind one of the boxes, the boy was shocked to see a girl tied up. She was the one begging for help, so the goblins were stealing children as well. The girl, seeing a person for the first time in a long time, began to cry, continuing to beg for help. Timothy hurried to untie her, noting that she was very lucky to be noticed by him. After untying the gag from her mouth, the girl introduced herself as Lindsay and said she was from a nearby village. Sincerely thanking him for saving her, the girl folded her arms over her chest, stammered, and asked the name of her savior. When Timothy said his name, Lindsay was shocked. He asked her if she knew the nickname Corpse Collector. The girl apologized barely audibly, saying that she had certainly heard all sorts of gossip about the boy, and although the rumors weren't positive at all, the guy was completely different from what she had heard. Lindsay came closer to him, looked him in the eye, and said he was different because he saved her life. In her opinion, the guy didn't look like a corpse collector at all. These words struck him to the heart. Without giving Timothy a chance to recover, the girl shouted in admiration that the guy was a hero to her. Timothy had always dreamed of becoming an adventurer who saves people from danger, and finally, he had this opportunity. The boy told the girl to get up and go with him. He promised to take her to the village. Lindsay didn't immediately understand what he said, but at that moment, even if just a little bit, the guy was happy. Someone needed him. A few minutes later, he turned to Lindsay and asked her to hide behind a rock for a while. Thanks to his amazing armor, Timothy could feel the goblins approaching. A few seconds later, he was convinced that there were more than just a few of them. They had also seen their target. By eye, Timothy was able to estimate that there were about 20 opponents, all of whom were level 1. Compared to his level 15, he said that his opponents had better get ready because very soon they would be at his level. A fight broke out again between them. The battle between the boy and the group of level 1 goblins was quite bloody. Timothy's level increased systematically, in direct proportion to the destruction of his enemies. Thanks to level absorption, the guy could attack faster and faster. He was getting stronger every second. 4 goblins rushed at the boy from behind while he was dealing with the others. They tried to take him by surprise, but for Timothy, his opponents were very slow. Before they even reached the ground, he jumped into the air, and a second later he came at them from above like an avalanche, destroying them one by one. They had nothing to counter him. Soon, only he and a few enemies were left in the tunnel. The system confirmed the owner's level. It took a few seconds to count the number of enemies he had destroyed, and eventually the system reported that he had reached level 35. Lindsay came out of a side tunnel and asked if she could come out now, but Timothy told her to stay in the hiding place. The boy had shed a lot of the Goblin Lord's relatives' blood and had finally made his way here. The Goblin Lord was very angry and radiated powerful energy. He raised his fist, releasing smoke from his mouth. Timothy prepared for a fight. They were at the same level now. The boy shouted that he was no longer as weak as he had been the first time they met. The Goblin Lord raised a giant cleaver over his head, but Timothy shouted at him not to think he was easy prey. He gave his opponent a quick sword blow to the ribs. The Goblin Lord screamed in pain, and all his minions who came out from different sides of the tunnel hissed fiercely at Timothy. The guy quickly counted his opponents. There were 10 of them. While the ruler was alive, Timothy didn't want to be distracted by trifles. The boy found Lindsay with his eyes and shouted for her to throw him the knives. The girl threw the knives along with her belt at Timothy. They flew into the air, and in flight the knives came loose from their holsters and began to fly in a chaotic pattern right at Timothy and the surrounding goblins. Lindsay, seeing this, screamed her apology to the guy. She realized too late that she shouldn't have done that, but to her surprise, Timothy calmly replied that she shouldn't worry because everything was absolutely fine. He picked up a pair of knives in midair and stabbed all the goblins around him with lightning speed. He moved with incredible speed, catching the next knives before they hit the ground. Each round of weapons found another victim, and no one but Timothy could track his movements or avoid their defeat. The boy's speed grew to nearly lightning speed. The level 1 goblins could not navigate the space quickly enough to react. Finally, holding 6 daggers between his fingers, Timothy said that his opponents were very unlucky. They should not have interfered with him. Their very desire to help only reduced the damage to their owner. A second later, all 6 knives simultaneously hit every level 1 goblin that was still alive. When only Timothy and the Goblin Lord were left standing, the system notified him that his level had been raised to 45. The Goblin Lord attacked the guy from behind, but now Timothy's level was higher and he was much stronger than the boss. However, the boy's plans were shattered when the Goblin Lord began to actively counterattack, striking blow after blow. He was still stronger. Timothy, barely holding back his opponent's attacks, couldn't understand where such fierce pressure was coming from. The armor warned him that this monster had a bracelet that increased its performance in battle. Timothy was surprised. Usually it wasn't so easy to raise a player's level. That's why, to become even stronger, adventurers equipped themselves with items that increased their attributes. However, until that very moment, he hadn't even considered that monsters could equip themselves with such objects. But there was nothing to do. In this case, Timothy's goal was absolutely clear. He had to destroy the bracelet that made his boss's life easier, and he had to do it before the boss killed him. The guy realized it would not be easy. It seemed he would have to give it his all this time. Having prepared for counterattacks, Timothy decided that he would use all his strength and the power of his armor for this throw. In a moment, the former corpse collector rushed at the Goblin Lord. He tried to cheat a little, but the counterattack failed. The Goblin boss easily predicted the boy's maneuver and threw him into the depths of the cave. But it wasn't over for Timothy. He noticed that he had landed near the goblins he had killed earlier, with his daggers still sticking out of them. A second later, 2 daggers were already in his hands, and he was running at the Goblin Lord again. Halfway through, Timothy threw both daggers toward the goblin boss, distracting him. While the boss deflected the daggers with a supercilious grin, the guy had an interesting idea. Timothy ran as fast as he could toward the Goblin Lord, preparing to jump while targeting the bracelet on the boss's arm. The guy shouted that he had said it from the beginning. His goal was the bracelet. The effect of the object was nullified, and the Goblin Lord could not yet understand what had just happened. The boy noticed that it was the first time the Goblin Lord had seen weakness. Old Timothy stood at the entrance to the dungeon, but now he was many times stronger than before, and now it was the Goblin Lord who should run in terror. Finally, Timothy looked carefully at the giant and said that he could try to escape if he could. While the monster was thinking about what to do, the boy raised his sword to strike. He decided to attack first. The goblin lord was able to repel the boy's first attack, and at first it seemed to him that it wouldn't take much effort. But in a moment, Timothy threw the goblin boss a long way into the cave, causing him to slam into the wall. The guy was not going to give the enemy a break. He asked if the goblin lord was scared because it was no surprise. His life was now at stake. With his next blow, Timothy knocked the indescribably huge cleaver out of his opponent's hands. The boy realized that if he defeated the goblin lord now, he would be free of his weakness forever. But the main boss of the cave, the Lord of the Goblins, was not going to allow such an easy victory. He raised his fist for another blow. For Timothy, these efforts were insignificant, and he dealt a fatal strike to the monster's neck. That was the end of it. Thanks to this fight with the Goblin Cave boss, the boy would become even stronger from now on, and he thanked the creature for it. A few seconds later, the system notified him of a level increase, and Timothy's level was raised to the 80th. The guy turned toward Lindsay's hiding place and called out to her. The girl cautiously approached Timothy, looking at the corpse of the goblin lord. She couldn't believe that the boy had actually defeated him. Finally convinced she was safe, Lindsay said that the boy was now the strongest adventurer in the area. According to the usual ritual, Timothy began to mine treasure from the corpse of the goblin lord, cutting off his big fang. The guy had never dared to dream that the day would come when he would obtain such a rare material. Lindsay assured Timothy that he shouldn't worry. She was willing to carry anything he needed, wherever it had to go. Gradually, the corpse collector's bag filled up. The blade of the goblin lord and the cursed bone appeared there. Timothy sincerely thanked the girl for her help with the material. No one had ever offered him help like that before. Lindsay replied that he shouldn't worry. She wanted to thank him for saving her life, and this was an easy thing to do. The only thing that worried her now was what they would do with the body of the goblin lord. Timothy realized that he had already gathered good materials and no longer needed to hide. He could just return to the village. But if they left the goblins alive in this cave, they would be able to kidnap girls from the village again. Something had to be done. The guy asked Lindsay if she would stay with him a little longer. She asked where they were going. The boy replied that he would no longer allow the goblins to kidnap people, especially not his fellow villagers, and that all the monsters in the cave would be destroyed. When the enemies were finally defeated, the boy took the girl back to the village. It was time for them to return home. Timothy was now at the H100th level. Although he had left the village at level 1, he had risen quite a bit in that time. At H100, Timothy would be able to defeat most of the monsters around him. Filled with pride in his achievements, the guy said out loud that he had finally become a real adventurer. Lindsay, who had been walking a little behind him the whole time, asked him what he had just said. The girl ran across his path and shouted into his face that she had never heard of adventurers with a 3-digit level. Lindsay was sure that Timothy could no longer be considered a newcomer, but rather the strongest adventurer in the village. The boy agreed with her statement, although her words made him think. No matter how hard he tried to remember, he was sure he had never seen adventurers with such a high level as his. He could absorb the levels of defeated enemies, so the girl didn't have to worry about him. He had also been surprised when he first discovered that ability. This news only inspired Lindsay even more, and it turned out Timothy would be able to become even stronger thanks to it. Smiling with all her heart and clutching her hands to her chest, she said she would keep her fists crossed for him. Their sweet conversation was interrupted by a group of adventurers. The leader addressed the corpse collector. The guy's name was Michael. He was curious how Timothy got such armor. Was it because the corpse collector couldn't raise his level that he decided to rely on equipment? To Michael, Timothy would always be garbage even if he put on nice gear and armor. Michael said the guy would remain a first-level weakling and no equipment would help him bridge such a difference in levels. At his mockery, the head of the adventurer squad let his guard down and Timothy immediately took advantage of it. Threatening the boy with a dagger, Timothy said he was fed up and told him to shut up immediately. This unexpected turn of events took Michael by surprise. His first thought was to run away, which he successfully did. But it turned out to be a deceptive move, and in the next moment the head of the adventure, the squad, shouting that Timothy should not dare to be confused, ran to attack, but their attempt was a failure within seconds. Michael was on the ground, unarmed, not understanding how it had happened. The members of his group were also surprised by what they saw and didn't know whether they should stand up for their leader. Seeing their hesitation, Timothy asked if they wanted to be next and try fighting him. Michael, sitting on the ground, looked at his hands, unable to understand how he could lose to a first-level player. Timothy laughed in response, saying that Michael, with his level 20, was several times weaker than him. Hearing this, Michael's team members began checking Timothy's level and were stunned by what they saw. Michael joined them and suddenly fell silent when he saw Hale 100 next to Timothy's name. It had to be a joke if it was real. He couldn't even imagine what kind of monster he had just confronted. Timothy noted that at first he was just a corpse collector to his opponents, but now he was the monster. In truth, he was still just an ordinary adventurer. While explaining this, he suddenly realized no one was standing near him. Looking around, he saw a trio of adventurers running away down one of the alleys. The Zemlins, who came up to Timothy, noticed how much he had really changed. People were now running from him. The girl was very happy for her savior, but they had to leave, so she called out to him. She was sure she had to tell everyone in the village about his new abilities. Sometime later, the boy and girl entered a familiar store. The shop owner looked at the boy unfriendly and said he was listening, though not expecting anything special. Timothy, not paying attention to the man's reaction, said that he wanted to sell some materials. The vendor scoffed, saying the corpse collector shouldn't waste his time. He probably brought in some garbage again. Timothy simply smiled and silently took out some of his treasures. After placing them on the counter, he asked if it was still garbage. The amazed shopkeeper couldn't believe what he was seeing. The corpse collector was holding the large fang of the goblin lord. The man snatched it from Timothy's hands and examined it closely, asking where he could find such a rare object. Timothy paused for a moment and calmly announced that he had defeated the goblin lord on his own. As expected, the shopkeeper didn't believe him. It was too unbelievable for the old Timothy to do something like that. To confirm his story, the boy asked Lindsay to explain what happened. The girl backed up his claim without hesitation. Without waiting for the clerk's reaction, Timothy poured the rest of his treasures onto the counter. Realizing the man was frozen in place, Timothy asked if he would buy the items or if he should go somewhere else. If necessary, he could easily find another buyer for such rare treasures. The seller finally came to his senses and said that he would buy it all. He couldn't refuse such rare materials. Timothy could only hope the store owner would appreciate their value. Sometime later, the boy and girl went to the market to buy supplies. They were both hungry. Timothy showed a bag of gold to an old man he knew, and the man was overjoyed at his success. His grandfather asked where the boy had suddenly gotten so much money. It was incredible. Timothy happily replied that he had finally managed to defeat a powerful monster, and this was his reward for all his hard work. After hearing the explanation, his grandfather sincerely congratulated him on his achievement. But a second later, something happened that Timothy never expected. His grandfather ran up to him and hugged him tightly. At that moment, Timothy felt like the happiest person on the planet. He was truly supported. Then he noticed something happening at the exit of the market. He asked his grandfather and Lindsay to wait at the counter, and it turned out to be a good decision. Werewolves had broken into the village, and all the residents were in danger. One of the monsters had already seen its first target. A girl was trying to run away as fast as she could. Timothy arrived just in time to help her and delivered a fatal blow to the monster, saving the girl. When it was over, he looked back at the girl lying on the ground and asked if she was okay. She responded positively, and he calmed down. Looking at the remaining werewolves, Timothy asked what they were, but he didn't really expect an answer. It didn't matter. They shouldn't have come to the village today. The first few werewolves were followed by a whole pack that climbed over the fence. They lined up in front of Timothy, preparing to attack. The boy realized he couldn't let them into the village. Meanwhile, the locals began searching for Michael and his group of adventurers, but Timothy realized they had fled. They had abandoned their duties because of him, so saving the village was now entirely his responsibility. He didn't mind, especially since the werewolves rushed into the attack. Each of them was level 8, and they posed no real threat to him. Of course, one person couldn't stop the whole gang, so some of them slipped past him and ran straight into the village to attack the townspeople. Hearing their screams, Timothy saw there were too many of them on the street, and Timothy knew he should never forget about them. If nothing was done about this invasion, the werewolves would simply kill all the locals. When one of the werewolves rushed at another victim, Timothy repelled the attack and punched the predator in the nose. He beat the werewolf until it stopped moving, and in the end, there was one less enemy. When it was all over, Timothy asked the man who had almost died if he was okay, and the man replied that he was not injured. When the man remarked that Timothy was a corpse collector, Timothy simply replied that he had more important things to do now. Although the locals considered him just a corpse collector and called him names, he still had clear moral principles. He couldn't leave people to die, so he needed to finish off the huge pack of monsters as soon as possible. The guy moved at high speed past local people who couldn't understand where he got his strength from. One by one he defeated the werewolves who had nothing to oppose the man with the H100th level. With each kill, the guy's level increased. He was absorbing them. Eventually his level rose to 72 in a very short time. Timothy had reached level 72 after defeating most of the monsters, but the werewolves were originally 10. If he had defeated all of them, he would have reached level 80. So everything suggested that Timothy had missed one, and now that werewolf was among the people in the village. The boy was right. One of the werewolves was sitting on the roof of a house watching a girl standing alone in the street. You might say Timothy found the victim just in time and got to her before the werewolf could land on the ground. The guy was well aware that even with his high-level abilities and experience, he would not be physically able to save everyone. Meanwhile, the werewolf was getting closer to his victim, who stood frozen in place, unable to move. The boy realized he couldn't accept what was happening. He had to save the girl. Maybe he could throw his sword at the beast. The guy had only one chance, but it was better to take the risk than to regret it later. So without hesitation, he threw his weapon in the direction of the monster. The sword flew in a straight trajectory toward its target, with only seconds left before impact. A strong blow from the sword sent the werewolf flying into the nearest wall of the house. It was wounded in the chest. Timothy approached the girl, who was sitting with her arms wrapped around her head. She was terrified. When the girl realized she was no longer in danger, she looked up at the guy and, surprised, called him a corpse collector. She asked if he had really come to rescue them. Timothy was glad the girl was okay. The guy realized he didn't have time to talk, so he hurried to say goodbye, glad that he had managed to save the child. But before Timothy could get far, he was surrounded by locals, and he thought that nothing good was in store for him. One of the locals said that they all had a conversation to have with the corpse collector. The guy understood that this was to be expected. People would be unhappy that they had been saved by a corpse collector. He didn't want to listen to more insults at his expense and hurried to say goodbye, saying they probably wouldn't want to see his face again. But before he could leave, he was stopped once more. Only this time, people wanted to thank him for their salvation. It was thanks to his protection that no one in the village was injured. Timothy had risked his life to save them. After these words, the mother of the girl he had rescued approached him, and he didn't know how to react to this behavior. The woman asked him to listen carefully to her words and thanked him for saving her child, bowing low to the ground. Timothy, seeing this, rushed to the woman and told her to raise her head immediately. He just wanted to help people. That's all. He used to collect loot from corpses, and that would never change. However, now Timothy had the strength to help others. He proclaimed that from now on he would become an adventurer who would help people in need. He asked the locals to watch him, for which he would be immensely grateful. Then he turned around and walked away. On that day, he went from a miserable corpse collector to an adventurer who saved the village from destruction. But the next day came. Lindsay ran after the boy with all her might, calling his name. He didn't hear her right away because he was absorbed in his thoughts. When Timothy looked around, the girl stopped in shock. She asked where his armor was. The guy laughed and asked if she meant his armor of the abyss. If so, he had been wearing it that morning. He suddenly realized that he could put it on and take it off whenever he wanted. Thanks to this armor, the guy was finally able to become a real adventurer. He was happy about what he had found in that strange cave, but the boy was still tormented by thoughts. Why was there a strange dragon corpse in the goblin's cave? Although it didn't really matter now, in the end everything had turned out for the best. Meanwhile, in the goblin furnace, not far from the dragon's corpse, something was happening. Michael and his friends were trying to get away from the enemy who was chasing them. The boy and girl were struggling to keep up with their leader, tears in their eyes, begging Michael for help. Michael didn't understand what such a monster was doing in these caves. He was trying to escape the pursuit, but no matter how hard he tried, it was all in vain. The monster was already in front of him, and the guy sat down on the ground, realizing that his time had come. Far away from the goblin's cave, Timothy still felt something strange. Before that, a group of adventurers led by Michael had chased a cyclops around the village, and they had wounded it badly. Michael was a little angry. He didn't like that the monster had been able to escape. They had almost finished it off. The boy told his friends to run faster because the cyclops had already reached the entrance to one of the caves. When the monster disappeared inside, the trio stopped at the entrance, watching it try to hide in the tunnels. Michael realized that because they were not present when the village was attacked by werewolves, the group was fined a large sum of money. That's why they couldn't lose their prey. The Cyclops had to be killed as soon as possible. While they were talking at the entrance, the Cyclops was attracted by the smell of the dead dragon and began to devour its meat. The trio of adventurers followed the monster determinedly. In the heat of the chase, they didn't even bother to conduct reconnaissance. As the two boys and the girl moved through the tunnels, the unpleasant stench of death grew stronger. Someone must have died in this cave recently. When the adventurers reached the chamber, they were amazed by what they saw. One monster was eating another. The Cyclops was greedily devouring the corpse of a giant dragon. Looking at this, the members of the squad were sure something was wrong. Meanwhile, Timothy stood in the forest, trying to immerse himself in his feelings once again. He realized that this wasn't just a strange feeling, someone incredibly unusual was nearby. His feet led him to the goblin's cave. It seemed like he had some kind of connection with this place, just like all the people who were drawn here. Timothy followed the smell, which grew stronger with each step. The dragon's corpse was ahead, but what he saw made him shudder. A huge Cyclops was holding a dead man. In one sharp movement, the monster threw the adventurer's body away and it hit the ground with a splash of blood around it. After the Cyclops had finished off the last member of Michael's team, its eye found Timothy's silhouette in the darkness of the cave. The guy looked at the monster. He had never met such a demon before, but he was confident in his abilities. He was not in danger. Timothy decided to attack first, to be ahead of the curve before the Cyclops had time to make its move. But unexpectedly, the system stopped him, warning that the difference in levels was too great. Timothy was advised to avoid fighting. The guy was so shocked that he didn't notice the monster running up to him and striking him. For the first time, Timothy choked on the pressure. He lost his balance and flew into the depths of the cave. The system informed him that it was recommended to check the status of the enemy, and Timothy could not believe his eyes. This gigantic Cyclops of the Abyss turned out to be at level 200, which was extremely surprising. The guy still hadn't decided what to do. The system reported a powerful energy accumulation in the area of the enemy's head. Still lying on the ground, Timothy was advised to retreat immediately, but he didn't have the strength to do so. The Cyclops began to approach, ready to make him its next victim. The system kept screaming for an immediate retreat. Timothy tried to force himself to get up. He realized that if he didn't act now, his end would come right there. The system reported that there were 8 seconds left before the attack. The countdown continued. As Timothy leaned on his sword, the second the countdown ended, the Cyclops threw the boy away from it, emitting a powerful beam of energy from its eye. Timothy, unable to counteract the powerful opponent, screamed loudly from the blow and was badly injured. He fell to the ground, deep in the furnace. The corpse collector felt like he was losing consciousness, but the Cyclops was not going to stop. The guy didn't know how much time had passed, but something had definitely changed. The system reported that the enemy had left the cave. The monster may have mistaken Timothy for a dead man, but it was wrong, though it was close to the truth. The armor informed Timothy that he was seriously injured and recommended using a potion to heal his wounds. Timothy was delighted. He had completely forgotten that he had found such a potion in the goblin's lair. After drinking 1 bottle of the potion, the boy felt he could at least move more easily. He silently thanked the goblins for their medicine. The boy looked toward the exit of the cave. He had to urgently catch up with the Cyclops. It was definitely heading for the village. Timothy began moving toward the exit when suddenly someone called out to him, calling him Corpse Collector. It was a voice he was very familiar with. Looking around and peering into the darkness of the cave, he saw Michael near one of the walls. The boy was still alive, overcoming incredible pain. Michael said he saw the healing potion and demanded that Timothy give it to him. The leader of the adventurers still believed the potion was too valuable for someone like Timothy. Michael hoped to heal his wounds and escape before the monster reached the village. That's why he began to shout, demanding that Timothy hand over the healing potion immediately. But his enthusiasm quickly faded as he choked on a bloody cough. He began to beg Timothy, saying the pain was unbearable. The corpse collector asked the system that controlled his armor if healing potions could heal Michael's wounds. The system replied that it was impossible. Michael had too many fatal wounds and had 0 chance of survival. According to the calculations, he would die in a few minutes from blood loss. This news was, of course, very upsetting for Timothy, but he was also curious, would the level absorbance skill work on people? The system answered in the affirmative. The guy turned to Michael, saying that he could no longer help him. Michael replied that he had already figured as much. Michael cursed, wanting the pain to finally end. Maybe that was asking too much. Timothy offered him one option. He could put him out of his misery immediately. Michael replied that he wasn't stupid. He understood everything, so he asked Timothy to do it. With the last of his strength, he looked up at the corpse collector and told him to kill him. Timothy admitted that, to be honest, he had hated Michael all along. However, at that second, the guy realized that he would miss him, so he fulfilled the request and reached level 200. Meanwhile, the Cyclops had already reached the edge of the village, watching the inhabitants through the branches of the trees. The monster could feel the accumulation of energy that had drawn it there. It couldn't contain its roar of joy and delight. The victims had been found. But the monster didn't take into account that it had left one witness alive, Timothy, who suddenly ran up behind the Cyclops and struck it in the nose. The Cyclops growled in pain. One of its arms was wounded, and blood was spraying in all directions. The boy shouted that the monster should forgive him, but it would die by his hand. Timothy rushed to attack again. The former corpse collector, now at level 200, declared that the Cyclops should have finished off its enemies. It was precisely because the one-eyed monster hadn't done so that they were now at the same level. The guy couldn't wait any longer. He wanted to deal with the monster as soon as possible before it could kill the villagers. Finally, he added that he had to kill his friend with this hand, so now he was out of his mind with rage. To be asked twice was too much. The monster rushed to attack at the same second, angry at the impudence of a boy. The guy took advantage of his opponent's blind rage and jumped on his shoulder, trying to deceive his vigilance. Once behind the monster, the boy immediately struck it. However, the effect of the attack was weaker than Timothy had expected. The Cyclops' wings were stronger than they had seemed at first glance. The Cyclops began to generate energy again to strike, but Timothy couldn't give it a chance to relaunch. The boy realized too late that the energy accumulation was only for the purpose of inflicting a physical blow, and the Cyclops kicked him without giving him a chance to recover. Then, the Cyclops uprooted one of the nearby trees and swung it at the boy. The blow was so strong that Timothy fell to the ground and broke several tree branches in his path. Timothy collapsed, exhausted. He could barely catch his breath. His injuries were significant, but he was not stubborn. The lives of innocents were at stake. Even though they were now equal in level, for some reason the Cyclops still felt stronger. The boy took out another bottle of healing potion and drank it. The monster even tried to use a trick against him. After the potion, his condition improved significantly. Wiping his lips, he said, "It's not over yet." The Cyclops started generating power again, and the system reported that Timothy was advised to retreat immediately. He tried to orient himself as quickly as possible, but the Cyclops did not want to calm down. A second later, the guy was already dodging the monster's energy beam, and the corpse collector frantically tried to figure out a way out. There wasn't much choice, and Timothy knew it was better to attack than to constantly avoid his enemy's strikes. The boy flew into the air and hit one of the wings with a lightning strike, the wing the Cyclops had been using to protect its eye. Timothy's cry of pain echoed, but he managed to cut the monster's wing, although it was a difficult task. This small victory gave him renewed vigor and belief in himself. But what happened next even surprised the boy. The Cyclops pushed off the ground. It turned out the monster didn't want to fight anymore. It had decided to run away. Timothy couldn't stop him. The boy quickly realized that the Cyclops wanted to kill all the locals to restore his monstrous powers. Timothy ran as fast as he could after the monster. He had to get back to the village as soon as possible. It was in danger. The locals, meanwhile, had no idea what was coming until they saw the monster's giant shadow overhead. Luckily, they all managed to run away from the spot where the Cyclops landed, as the impact caused a real explosion. The first thing the Cyclops did after landing was destroy the houses around it. The villagers screamed and scattered in all directions, begging for help. This only attracted the monster's attention, and it began using its energy beam against the people and everything nearby. Timothy could not stand such vandalism. He struck the Cyclops unexpectedly and shouted for it to stop. As the monster prepared to counterattack, the boy disappeared from its field of vision, as if he had vanished into thin air. The monster looked up and saw his opponent in the air, preparing for another strike. A moment later, when Timothy reached his target, the Cyclops easily repelled the attack, a smile on its face. Timothy wasn't going to stop. He kept hitting the Cyclops over and over again. His goal was to save the village. The Cyclops responded to this restlessness by concentrating energy in its eye area. It wasn't going to die so easily. In the heat of emotion, Timothy almost forgot about his own safety. The monster tried to take advantage of that, but at the last second, Timothy managed to avoid injury. When the enemy saw it had missed, it swung its huge fist to strengthen the attack. This blow was inevitable. It was so powerful that Timothy sank into the ground, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and stones. The Cyclops, meanwhile, turned around and headed for the center of the village, jumping from one roof to another. When the dust and smoke cleared, people saw Timothy lying in the crater. A few seconds later, the guy tried to get up, saying that he had not yet completed his mission. He realized that only he could overcome such a strong demon, so he must never give up. The Cyclops reached the central market and stood in front of an old man, Timothy's grandfather, who was also his food supplier. The monster coldly called him a thug. The grandfather looked around and realized that even if he ran, they would still catch up to him. In that case, there was no point in fleeing. All he could do was buy time for the hero. And the hero didn't take long to appear. A couple of seconds later, Timothy stood in front of the monster's face. The boy looked back at his grandfather and shouted that a scrapper like him could never be a hero. But his grandfather was adamant. He said the boy was truly a hero. Otherwise, why else would he come to his aid? Timothy may have agreed, deep down, but he still didn't know how to defeat such a strong and powerful enemy. The old man was silent and simply replied that it didn't matter that he and the monster were of the same level. Digging through the drawer, the old man told the boy not to keep so many unimportant thoughts in his head. A second later, when he found what he was looking for, he threw a piece of bread in Timothy's direction. The boy automatically grabbed it. Only after he had the piece in his hands did Timothy realize that it was the same bread the corpse collector ate every day. The old man asked if there was anything different now from the days when he was a corpse collector. Timothy said that the bread still tasted terrible, but thanks to his grandfather, he was able to pull himself together. Timothy thanked his grandfather and apologized to the monster for keeping it waiting. They could continue their fight. As soon as he finished his opening remarks, he immediately started running in the direction of the monster. Timothy flew around the Cyclops like a madman, striking it and avoiding counterattacks. At some point, he lost control, and the enemy grabbed his arm. The monster waved it in like a rag, and after spinning the boy hard enough, the Cyclops threw him toward one of the houses on the street. Soon, part of the street turned into a complete ruin, but Timothy was not going to give up. He was the only outpost to protect the people. Despite his best efforts, he could not find the path he needed to take to defeat this monster. Suddenly, Timothy heard a child crying and looked around to see a boy cowering in fear near the wall of the destroyed house. The corpse collector ran up to the boy, trying to protect him from the Cyclops, and shouted at him to run away immediately. The boy said, through his tears, that he was very scared and couldn't move because his legs didn't obey his head. In the end, all of Timothy's persuasion was in vain. The Cyclops' eye had spotted the little boy and had already made him its target. The giant monster immediately jumped up and landed right next to the frightened child, its mouth gaping open. The boy shrank back in fright, expecting to die, but Timothy covered him with his body, shouting that he would not allow this to happen. With all his desperation, the corpse collector resisted the giant fist of the Cyclops, which was trying to push him down with great pressure. Eventually, the monster retreated, and Timothy had a few seconds to catch his breath. He asked the boy to run away as soon as possible. The boy replied that he still couldn't move, and the Cyclops began to generate an energy beam near its head. Timothy, realizing that there wasn't much time left, began to persuade the boy, saying that he was brave and would succeed. Inspired by such warm words, the boy got to his feet and shouted that he would not be afraid from now on. While the child was running away to safety, Timothy prepared for the next round of battle. The system notified him of the energy accumulation and the need to retreat, but Timothy didn't have the strength to do so. It seemed that this time he would not escape. The Cyclops' eye released an energy beam toward the boy. This time, the energy was quite powerful. Timothy's body rammed into the building opposite and smashed it to pieces. After flying through the building, the guy ended up on the neighboring street, still breathing but almost exhausted. Despite the fact that he and the monster had the same level, the difference in strength was too great. The Cyclops was too powerful an opponent. The system notified him that he needed immediate treatment, so Timothy reached into the compartment with the potions. But a second later, Timothy realized that the compartment was empty. There wasn't a single bottle inside. It seemed that the healing potions had been lost during the monster's last attack and there was no hope for salvation. The guy realized that he had to be healed urgently, but gradually his consciousness began to fade. So, the village was destroyed. If he could recover, he could save all these people, and Timothy really wanted someone to help him. His request was heard. The bottle of the potion was already being emptied, providing the desired healing. Timothy gradually opened his eyes and saw a stranger helping him. Seeing that he had regained consciousness, the girl shouted joyfully. Timothy stood up and asked who she was. The stranger introduced herself as Melissa. She said that she was born and raised in the village, so she also wanted to protect it. She was just an ordinary village girl. The cyclops couldn't wait long. It was destroying everything around it, so Timothy had to get back to the fight as soon as possible. The girl shyly said that she saw the boy fight the monster to protect their village. All the people also wanted to protect this village despite everything that had happened before, and they were very grateful to him for his sacrifice. She got to her feet and offered Timothy her hand, suggesting they get out of here. But the guy said he couldn't do that because he was the only one in the village who could defeat this monster. The guy leaned on his sword, trying to get up. He had to come up with some plan to save the people in his condition. But Melissa replied that if Timothy lost to the cyclops now, then nothing would save the village. The boy saw the village burning and smoking behind the girl's back. The scale of destruction was overwhelming. Destruction was increasing with each passing second. Melissa believed that because Timothy was the only defender, he needed to avoid meeting the monster for now. He could only resume his duties once his injuries were fully healed. The guy's whole body really hurt. It seemed like he needed to rest a little more before fighting again at full strength. But Timothy and Melissa's plans were not to be, as the cyclops landed in front of them a few seconds later, ready for a new round. Melissa once again held out her hand to the boy, who had to decide whether to run away or not as soon as possible. This time the boy wasn't going to argue. He grabbed Melissa's hand and ran as fast as he could away from the monster. The girl ran into an alleyway and Timothy, without stopping, asked her how she knew his name. Rounding another corner, Melissa said that the boy was extremely popular in the village. Timothy asked if this popularity was somehow related to the corpse collector, and the girl said, of course, but there were some nuances. Abruptly stopping and turning to the boy, she smiled and said that she considered him a hero. When the village was attacked by werewolves, she was also present on the street and saw everything with her own eyes. Suddenly, blushing and closing her eyes, Melissa said that this was why she believed in him. The girl believed that Timothy could save the village, and the boy was incredibly inspired by her words. He promised, with respect in his voice, that he would definitely kill this monster and save their village. The conversation between the boy and the girl was interrupted by screams from around the corner. When they looked out, they saw some people dragging villagers to carts in the middle of the small square. There were 2 carts already filled with residents, and only the last girl was left to be dragged away. The leader of the robbers ordered his men to hurry up because soon the monster would reach there. Even if they all openly kidnapped people, no one could stop them now. The leader of the robbers and looters laughed out loud. Their time to make money had finally come. Timothy didn't understand why he had to come across these disgusting creatures who couldn't even be called human during such destruction. These creatures were going to take everything they could carry from civilians. Melissa was also very outraged by the actions of these people. Their actions were absolutely inhuman. Being fascinated by everything that was happening on the square, the guy didn't notice that the girl was no longer with him. He looked around and saw one of the looters, who was quite strong, holding Melissa and threatening to kill her. The giant looter said that if the guy didn't want this girl to get hurt, he should drop his weapon. Timothy could barely restrain himself from killing the attacker on the spot, only stopped by the girl in the stranger's arms. Eventually agreeing to the giant's terms, the 3 came around the corner and showed themselves to the leader of the robbers. The marauder scratched his head thoughtfully, as if he had informed them in advance that they didn't need the men, but in a second, all the attention of the gang members was directed at the girl, who was really very beautiful. One of the looters said that he was quite sure they would be able to sell her for a high price. Timothy asked how these people had the nerve to do such things while the village was in danger. The head of the looters said that he didn't care what happened to the village. They originally came to this village to plunder it, and the invasion of this monster was useful. Suddenly running up to Timothy, the leader of the looters said that he was lucky that they had not killed every single one of them. These words made the guy's blood boil. Were these crushed people really complete bastards? Timothy's reaction did not impress the leader at all. He laughed and asked if he was really an adventurer. Leaning down to the boy's ear, the robber said that he was very sorry he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Even with so much power, the adventurer could do nothing in this situation. The leader of the robbers no longer paid any attention to Timothy. He turned to his men and told them that it was time to get on the road. Looking at Melissa, who was still in the giant's hands, the man ordered him to watch her more closely. The robbers did not want the boy to interfere in their affairs. Timothy just needed a second. As soon as the right opportunity arose, he would save Melissa, and suddenly that moment came. It was Lindsay. The girl was running at the burly man with such speed that she didn't have time to stop in time. When he jumped aside, she tripped over a stone and fell to the ground, still holding the knife in front of her. The burly bandit said that she could never beat him. He was in a different weight class. But Lindsay replied with a smile that she didn't have such a goal. The plan was a little different. She shouted that she was just a decoy, and a second later Timothy took his chance. The adventurer was moving so fast and had such strength that the robber had no chance. He just flew into the air. The robber dropped Melissa from his hands, and Timothy managed to pick her up in time. The girl flew straight into his arms. The boy told her that everything would be okay now. The girl had to hide now, because the robbers were already preparing to attack, and the fight was inevitable. The looters pulled out their weapons and surrounded the guy from all sides. The guy looked at this pathetic spectacle and did not understand whether these people were really sure of what they were doing. He was not going to hold back. The leader of the robbers shouted with laughter that they were not afraid of him, that he was a fool pretending to be a hero. Timothy turned in his direction and said that he was giving them one last warning. It was not too late to stop. There was too big a difference in levels, and soon it was over. The still living leader asked what Timothy was, saying adventurers were not that fast. Timothy came closer to the robber and said that, unfortunately, he was no ordinary adventurer. Their marauding squad had been unlucky enough to come across a level 20,000 adventurer. The leader cursed and jumped up from his seat, throwing himself at the guy with the sword. He could not stand such humiliation. When it was over, the system notified them that Timothy's level had risen and reached the maximum mark for a human. The guy was amazed. This meant that a person could not go beyond the 250th level. He had never thought there could be a level limit, but he had also never heard of adventurers with a level as high as his. He was brought out of his thoughts by Melissa, who threw herself around his neck screaming, and he could barely stay on his feet. She thanked him for saving her, but Timothy said he would never have left her. He couldn't have done that, because it was this girl who had saved him when she gave him a restoration potion to drink. If not for her, that cyclops monster would have killed him long ago. So Timothy's whole being screamed that he had to protect this girl. Melissa took the boy's face in her hands and said that, after all that had been done, he had become a real hero to her. The guy was confused. He didn't think he deserved such words in his direction. He had never been praised. If he had left those robbers alive, they could have robbed other villages. These thoughts were constantly running through his head. He was well aware that there was no other choice. He had to take their lives, otherwise they would not stop. Melissa said that it was not his fault at all. He was not to blame for anything. He did not need to beat himself up. The guy had to take all those lives to save the villagers, who were now able to hug each other. That is why she believed there was no need to reproach himself for this act. Timothy did the right thing. She put her hand to her chest, looked wide-eyed into Timothy's face, and said that he was her hero. These words became real honey for the guy, who had been deprived of kind words all his life, and now he felt much better. Lindsay, who ran up to them, said that all the people who had been caught had already returned to their homes. The boy put his hand on the girl's head and said that she was a great girl, which made her laugh and dance on the spot. Lindsay said she was very happy to be able to help and be of service. While Timothy was fighting, she could only watch, but she wanted to help. She really wanted to. Therefore, next time she would really like to fight with him. She wanted to be close to her savior and be useful to him. Timothy replied that he did not agree with this. He said it was okay, the girl should live her childhood. Suddenly, a cyclops reappeared on the horizon, looking for an adventurer. Timothy turned to the girls and said it would be better for the two of them to hide as soon as possible. The system informed him that now that he had reached the 250th level, he would finally be able to deal with this monster. Timothy looked in the direction of the cyclops. Finally, Now he had the opportunity to overcome this monster. A few minutes later, the Cyclops reached the square where the girls and the boy were standing. Timothy was even glad to see him again. This time would be the last. The Cyclops would lose his life. But the presence of the girls still prevented the fight from starting, and the guy once again told them to hide immediately. While the girls were running away, Timothy apologized to the monster for his escape during their last meeting. But now he was not going to run away. He suggested they put an end to all their differences here in this square. Watching the Cyclops destroy everything on its way to him, Timothy remembered that he hadn't even been able to wield a sword before. Then one day he had swung his sword for the first time to save his life. After that, Timothy had to fight to defend his home, and at this very moment he would have to use his sword to fulfill the hopes of his friends. The guy shouted that the creature had better get ready, and the confrontation began. Now the Cyclops would feel the blow of a man who had surpassed human capabilities on his own skin. Such an impassioned speech completely deprived the monster of patience, and it broke through houses and rushed straight at Timothy. But the guy, without even moving, responded to this rage with a clear sword blow. Timothy said that the monster's attacks were in vain because he was not the same guy he had been last time. Timothy's counterattack forced the Cyclops to fly a long distance and fall to the ground. He stayed where he was, looking at the huge pile of dust that had risen into the sky. A second later, the Cyclops reappeared through the dust, generating a stream of energy and aiming it at Timothy. The system reported that an incredible energy accumulation had been detected, but Timothy replied that the armor should not worry. The guy raised his sword and said there would be no problem with that, because in this world, level decided everything. And now the Cyclops of the Abyss, no matter how gigantic, had less power than Timothy at level 250. The Cyclops made his move, directing the flow of energy. It struck Timothy's side, but the boy said that it didn't matter to him at all. The monster had no chance of winning if the difference in their levels was so great, and that was exactly what was happening. The Cyclops growled at the boy with rage. The monster could not understand how his opponent had become so strong in the time they had not seen each other. Timothy, looking at him, asked what was wrong. Was the monster scared? This was quite strange, given that the Cyclops had felt strong when he killed the villagers. But karma exists, and now it was the monster's turn to be crushed, which the boy agreed to provide. The monster shouldn't be so surprised. The boy finally moved and ran at high speed toward the Cyclops. In this world, everything was decided by level, and the guy proved it by stabbing the monster with his sword. The blow was so strong that the Cyclops could not remain standing and fell to the ground. The monster was very angry. When it got to its feet, it immediately fired an energy beam at Timothy. The boy said that the Cyclops had not yet realized, but it was his duty to show the creature what real despair was. The guy put his hand forward, which in this case acted as a protective shield, and absorbed the energy of the monster's attack. The Cyclops shook his head in despair, and Timothy asked if he now understood the difference between them. The monster, who had considered himself omnipotent, could not accept such a loss. After a couple of minutes, he rushed into another attack. But punching with his giant fist was a mistake. The guy was not only stronger than last time, but also faster. He managed to dodge immediately. After the physical attack, the Cyclops used another energy beam, hoping to take advantage of the element of surprise. Timothy realized that he couldn't wait any longer, and he jumped into the air, intending to end the fight. The Cyclops tried to track his trajectory, but it was all in vain. The guy was approaching fast, so the Cyclops had to defend himself. With a single lightning strike, Timothy cut off the hand that the Cyclops was using to cover his eye. This loss turned out to be very significant for the monster. It screamed in pain, holding its wounded arm with its remaining hand. Timothy wanted to finish the monster as soon as possible, because this story had dragged on for too long. The boy demanded that the Cyclops kneel before him, but the creature went completely crazy and began to emit energy beams in all directions, saying it was useless to resist. The boy ran up to the Cyclops and punched it in the body. The Cyclops fell to the ground. He saw his opponent running toward him to finish what he had started. The guy said that the monster had harmed many people, and now it was time to pay. He stabbed the giant creature in its only eye. The next day, a large construction project began in the village, and all the locals helped each other. Leaders immediately emerged among them, telling others what to do and where to use their strength. One of the guys who was carrying wood tripped over something and started to fall. Suddenly, like a shadow, Timothy appeared from behind and caught the boy along with his heavy burden. The guy looked back and saw the corpse collector in front of him. He thanked Timothy for his help, and Timothy told him to be more careful. Sometime later, Timothy stood under a tree at a distance from the village and pondered what level transformation meant. The system explained that with the level transformation skill, by absorbing levels, the user could transform them into new unique skills. Unique skills have a variety of useful effects, such as speed boosts or fire resistance. This was a good bonus for adventurers as they received experience points and increased their level. These skills could be obtained with a very low probability, and Timothy had now gained this ability. At first, he could not receive experience points, and therefore unique skills were not available to him. This meant that, in exchange for levels, Timothy could now gain very rare unique skills, which made him think. The main question for the boy now was, what was the armor of the abyss really like? The system recommended that he first learn the skill, Breaking the Limit, which would allow him to gain an unlimited number of levels. The price of this rare skill was 240 levels. That was the price to pay for it. If he bought this skill now, Timothy would immediately lose almost all of his 250 levels. But if you looked at it from another angle, this skill was simply necessary for Timothy. When he realized this, he no longer hesitated but resolutely paid the necessary price for new opportunities. The system told him that to buy a skill, he had to say a code phrase in the name of the desired skill, the phrase being purchase request, which he did. After the conditions were met, the system announced that it was performing a level transformation. The guy did not realize what was happening to him, but a second later, a powerful energy beam shot up into the sky. At the same time, an element on Timothy's armor was activated, and this skill was quite painful. As if from the heart, 240 levels began to fly out of the boy's talisman. A few minutes later, the system announced that the transformation was complete, and the Break the Limit skill was obtained. The guy suddenly experienced a new feeling, as if his consciousness had expanded. The system reported that the limit of the human level had been exceeded. In other words, the guy was now a being beyond human. It had been a long journey. Meanwhile, a new traveler entered the village. He was dissatisfied, feeling that he had traveled all this way for nothing. Despite all the adventures along the way, it turned out that the monster had already been destroyed, so his time was wasted. In addition, the man was curious about the adventurer who had defeated the demon and asked about his current location. The system notified its owner that the maximum level had been exceeded and that 200 levels were waiting to be absorbed. These levels were then granted to the owner. The guy had completely forgotten that last time he had failed to absorb the Cyclops' level. After a few seconds, Timothy watched his level scale change as active absorption took place. Although he had spent almost all his levels on the transformation, he could now feel at ease and prepared to fight monsters again. Timothy decided that he had to learn as many unique skills as possible. All of these skills were extremely valuable. If he could obtain enough of them, he might become the strongest adventurer in the world. He realized that first he needed to think through his plan of action. Timothy's thoughts were suddenly interrupted by Melissa, who attacked the adventurer from behind, causing him to fall to the ground in surprise. The girl said that she had been looking for him. After yesterday's victory over the monster, chaos had broken out in the village and she couldn't find him anywhere. Timothy apologized and explained that yesterday he had been helping the villagers put out fires. Lindsay, who also suddenly appeared on the lawn, said that Melissa had been very worried about him. When the boy and girl looked back, Lindsay added with a smile that of course, she had been worried too. Timothy said he was very happy that the girls were okay. He had really been worried about them. Melissa smiled and said that it was all thanks to her boyfriend and she was very grateful to him, saying it was just a thank you. Then Melissa approached Timothy and kissed him on the cheek. After that, both the boy and the girl felt a bit out of sorts. Finally, Melissa, looking down, said that she had fallen in love with Timothy. Before the guy could recover from the news, the girl was already running away, blushing. Only Lindsay and Timothy remained on the lawn, staring at each other in silence, unable to fully comprehend what had just happened. An old man suddenly appeared behind the boy and said with a laugh that it seemed spring had finally come to him. Unable to endure the girls and the old man's teasing any longer, Timothy began shouting and chasing them away. They ran off, laughing. Left alone, the guy could no longer hide his joy. Someone had fallen in love with him, something he had never even dreamed of before. Timothy didn't know what to do about it, but the system told him that he had to act like a man. A few days later, a large group of adventurers appeared near the village. It seemed they had reached their destination. What they found looked like a wasteland. "Were we too late?" one of the squad members asked. Another replied that this was probably not the case and suggested that maybe another monster had attacked the village. If it had been the work of a flaming dragon, nothing would have remained of the village. The head of the squad said that, in any case, they needed to ask the locals about the attack. No matter what happened before their arrival, the adventurers had to prevent the dragon from attacking. Listening to the commands of their leader, the adventurers moved toward the village with determination. Meanwhile, something was happening in the infamous Goblin Cave, and it was quite dangerous. In the depths of darkness, a black dragon awoke and poured flames all around. Timothy decided to practice some of his new skills and have a little fun with some monsters. All the daggers the guy fired hit their targets. The guy was back to level 1, and in the last few days he had acquired many unique skills. Running past the various inhabitants of the forest, the boy recalled that his first skill was poisonous coating. Although it cost 200 levels, this skill allowed him to apply deadly poison to any weapon. With such a setup, Timothy could handle small monsters, which is what he was doing at the moment. His second skill was knife throwing, and with these two skills he had lost all his levels, but thanks to them, Timothy could now defeat monsters by avoiding direct confrontations. The only drawback of poison was that it took time for the monster to die. Even at level 1, Timothy could now regain his former strength with great speed. The boy stood in clearing the area. Timothy saw the rays of the new levels he had gained rise above the forest. The system reported that Timothy's level had risen to 41, and he decided to spend the points on new skills. Timothy sent in a purchase request and announced that he wanted to trade levels for a poison boost. A few seconds later, the system complied with the request, and from now on, monsters should die faster. The guy decided that enough was enough for today. Now, about 20 monsters were poisoned, and in a couple of hours he would be at level 200 again. After completing everything he had planned, Timothy decided to head back. On the road, he saw a large group of people and caught up with the last of the crowd. The guy asked what was going on. The head of the adventurer squad, a man named Abe, was intrigued by the unexpected meeting and asked if the guy was also an adventurer. Abe was level 120 and a representative of the Adventurers Guild. He wanted to offer the boy a place in their group, but looking at Timothy's data on his monitor, saw that the boy's current level was only 1, which was not enough. All the adventurers gathered around began discussing the fact that Timothy must be a beginner. It was the expected reaction. Abe assumed Timothy probably wanted to become an adventurer, but Timothy replied that he had been one for a long time. This answer stunned the guild representative, who didn't even know how to respond. One of the squad members hugged Timothy's shoulders and, laughing, asked why, in that case, the guy still had a level of 1. "It must be some kind of joke," he said. But as he took a closer look at Timothy's face, the man recoiled. He couldn't believe it. He had heard rumors about this eccentric boy. He was called the weakest adventurer in the history of the universe, the very collector of corpses. Timothy replied that it was true and asked what problem the man had with it. Realizing that the situation was escalating, Abe interjected. He explained that they had received a guild assignment to hunt. Recently, eyewitnesses had seen many special demons in these lands. They were here for one reason. The Black Dragon, a powerful monster of level 150, was hiding in the area. Abe knew that defeating such a monster alone was impossible. That's why he had gathered a group of adventurers with unique skills. His squad would overcome the dragon, and the locals should not worry. Realizing he hadn't even introduced himself formally, Abe shook hands with Timothy. While doing so, Timothy calculated that theoretically he could handle the dragon himself. However, one thought troubled him. Was it really the same black dragon who had given him the armor? Their conversation was interrupted by a squad member running toward Abe with news. The head of the unit intercepted the boy and asked what was wrong. The guy was out of breath and spoke in long pauses. He said that their scouts had found the dragon. The scouts had no doubt. It was definitely the Black Dragon. After hearing the scouts' report, Abe announced that the squad should immediately head to the cave. To ensure every member heard him, the leader repeated that the target of their mission had been found and that everyone needed to get ready. These words energized the squad, but Timothy realized something troubling. The average level of the group was about 120. Although some members had unique skills, they would struggle greatly against a level 150 dragon. Timothy knew he could not leave these people to their fate. He decided to join B's group and asked for permission. The boy hoped that the monsters he had poisoned earlier would die soon so he could reach level 200. With such a level, there shouldn't have been any problems. But Abe said no. Looking back at Timothy, Abe said that it was too dangerous. The boy didn't understand the seriousness of the situation. Timothy tried to argue with the group leader, but he only heard condemnation from the other adventurers. One of them approached and bluntly told Timothy that their leader had been too lenient, calling Timothy a weakling. That ended the conversation. All the adventurers followed Abe, leaving Timothy behind. The guy felt desperate. He realized that, at this rate, all those people could die, but with his current level of 1, he really couldn't help them. He had no choice but to wait until his levels returned and then catch up with the stubborn adventurers. Sometime later, Abe looked upon a horrific sight, something no one had warned them about. It wasn't just any black dragon, it was the Black Dragon, a catastrophe-ranked monster. This dragon dominated all black dragons, and its level was 300. The destroyer of worlds killed all the scouts and greeted the newcomers with flames, ready to attack. Abab, seeing this terrible sight, shouted for his men to retreat immediately. None of them could cope with such an enemy. Help was needed. As Abe tried to give the order to contact the guild, the dragon struck him with its massive tail, and at that moment, Timothy felt that the battle had begun, and he had to run to the cave immediately. He saw the dragon from afar and instantly recognized it as the same monster from the goblin cave. Timothy couldn't understand how it had happened. Was it just pretending in the oven? But he immediately stopped himself. Now was not the time to think about that. The destroyer of worlds raised its head and began generating flames, preparing to strike. Timothy sped up when he saw the flames break out and start killing the adventurers. When he asked how long it would take to absorb monster levels, the system answered, about 30 seconds. The guy demanded the process be faster because the dragon wasn't going to wait. There were not many survivors left. Finally, the system notified him that the monsters were confirmed dead from the poison. He was almost there. The levels were absorbed and raised his total to 2011. The guy immediately shouted that he wanted to make a purchase request. A few seconds later, the dragon released flames in Timothy's direction, but he used flame resistance to shield himself. Abe, who was lying on the ground behind Timothy, was shocked. He asked the squad leader who else was still alive. Abe couldn't even string 2 words together. The only thing he could express was his astonishment at how the destroyer of worlds' attack had been stopped. The same impudent adventurer who mocked Timothy before asked why they were barely standing while the so-called corpse collector wasn't even wounded. Timothy looked in his direction and replied that it was because he was much stronger than them. But even with this power, he couldn't save everyone. So he apologized, but it was too late. The guy lay on the ground, dead. Timothy knew that no matter how strong he was now, he still couldn't save everyone. But for the sake of the adventurers who died here, he had to be decisive. The boy shouted in the dragon's face that he would defeat it here and now. The dragon roared in response. A second later, black flames flew in Timothy's direction, and Ebba called out the boy's name in fright. Timothy glanced halfway at Abe and told him not to worry. With one hand, he captured all of the dragon's flames and destroyed them. The guy looked at his opponent and said that such weak flames would never hurt him. Along with Abe's shock, Timothy now faced the doubled rage of the destroyer of worlds. Despite the rising intensity, the boy remained calm, just as he had been during the monster's first attack. However, he had spent most of his levels to get flame resistance, and now he had dropped to level 25. The guy was invulnerable to the enemy's flames, but now he didn't know how to win. He needed to raise his level somehow. The dragon wasn't blind. Seeing its flames fail, it decided to use physical force instead. Timothy did not appreciate this decision. He barely had the agility to avoid such attacks. The boy realized he could not withstand the physical assaults of the destroyer of worlds at his current level, but in a stunning moment, the dragon's head suddenly separated from its body. Timothy stared at the incredible sight. An unknown adventurer had done it. The man said that Timothy had disappointed him. Impressed by the speed of events and the ease with which the dragon was slain, Timothy asked who the stranger was. The adventurer introduced himself as Tyler and said that he was the only one of his kind on the entire continent. Radiating infinite self-confidence, the guy added that he was the only adventurer of catastrophe rank. Timothy's jaw dropped. Catastrophe? He had never heard of that rank before. A bab, who had now gotten up and approached Timothy, said that this was also his first time seeing Tyler, but he knew this was an adventurer of legendary strength. According to rumors, no one could ever reach the same level. This warrior stood head and shoulders above all others. 4 eyes were now fixed on Tyler, scrutinizing a man of such rare power and realizing what it meant. Tyler laughed loudly and turned to Ab, flattered that the guy was well educated on the subject. Timothy, looking at Tyler's data, agreed. This man was undoubtedly above all people. Tyler was level 300. The system notified Timothy that this target had the skill of breaking the limit from birth, and he realized that Tyler's skill was the exact opposite of his own. Finally, Timothy began to radiate real feelings of hatred. Tyler then revealed that the adventurer in black armor had disrupted all his plans. Timothy looked at the man in surprise and asked what he meant. Tyler asked if Timothy hadn't heard what people were saying about him in the village, that he was described as a hero in black armor who defeated a demon one-on-one. Because of all the praise aimed at Tyler, he had wondered if the rumors were true, but Timothy's presence had only disappointed him. Suddenly, the destroyer of worlds opened its eyes and growled. The adventurer didn't even flinch, despite sitting on its back. A second later, Tyler plunged his sword into the dragon's head and ordered it to shut up. "We're having an important conversation here," he said, "and the dragon doesn't need to interrupt." Tyler then asked if the boys knew that the destroyer of worlds would continue to regenerate unless its magical core was destroyed. The guy looked ominously at him. He knew in his heart that it was the same dragon, was still surprised because his suspicions had turned out to be true. Tyler, meanwhile, said that he hadn't destroyed the core at that time. He had just left the dragon to die in that cave. He had watched as the monster, after eating a piece of dragon flesh, evolved very quickly and became even fiercer. The destroyer of worlds was too strong a dragon and wouldn't have left even a single piece of the village untouched. That's why Tyler needed a monster weaker than him, and that one-eyed man was perfect for the mission. The adventurer said the guys were probably wondering why he did it. He needed to set a monster on the village in order to become a hero. The second step would be to kill that dead lizard again and become even stronger. As a result, Tyler would gain unlimited power and become famous throughout the world. However, this lowlife in black armor had ruined everything. Tyler could no longer contain his emotions and just screamed. Timothy asked if all of this had been planned to achieve such petty goals. Tyler laughed and called him a fool, saying that an adventurer like him needed power, fame, money, and women. He sincerely believed that with such power he could live as he pleased. Timothy called Tyler stupid, a real idiot. The guy became furious. Many residents and good adventurers had died for the sake of his opponent's selfish desires. Scorching Tyler with his eyes, Timothy asked if he had ever even thought about that. Without waiting for an answer, the boy turned to his armor and asked it to lend him its strength. He was eager to bring one arrogant bastard down to earth, and now was the right time for that. Tyler laughed arrogantly and asked if the boy really wanted to teach him a lesson. With a shout, he warned Timothy not to overestimate himself, claiming to be a noble body. The guy activated the power of his armor. Timothy looked at the enemy's actions with sadness, trying to come up with an alternative to fighting someone at level 300. He also realized that if they started a battle now, he wouldn't stand a chance at his current level, just 21. However, there was one detail that could help him, the dragon's core. If the boy destroyed it now, the armor would be able to absorb the dragon's level, and that monster had a level of 300. Timothy asked the armor if it had a skill for ranged attack that he could acquire right now. The system began searching, but it took a few seconds, and Tyler wasn't going to wait. He was already on the attack, shouting that it was too late to beg for mercy. He charged right into the middle of the group, and those nearby tried to jump away. The force of his attack was so strong that Abe and Timothy were thrown a long distance, unable to keep their balance or withstand the shockwave. In the end, Timothy fell to the ground, smoke pouring from his body in all directions. He couldn't get to his feet. He had experienced Tyler's power firsthand and finally understood what disaster rank meant. But Tyler wasn't going to stop. He shouted that Timothy must have gone crazy, claiming that this was his end. Timothy, however, realized that if this beating continued, he would be in real trouble. Unexpectedly, the system informed him that the search was complete and recommended purchasing the small grenade skill. Timothy didn't understand how that would help. He believed he couldn't destroy the core even if he tried, but the system said he didn't need to. In fact, the armor recommended using poisoned knives to increase their level. The guy got to his feet. Tyler, disappointed to see his opponent still standing, was enraged. He started shouting that Timothy couldn't even stand properly, let alone fight, but Timothy decided to fully rely on the armor system and made a request for small grenades. Tyler watched the guy's actions but didn't understand what he was doing. His opponent's behavior caused him to hesitate. Having acquired a new skill, Timothy said that everything was about to change and threw the knives in the adventurer's direction. The attack did not frighten Tyler at all. He laughed, calling it child's play. What was the point of throwing knives if they didn't even reach their target? But Timothy replied that the enemy was not the target. The former corpse collector shouted that this time he was aiming at the dragon. A second later, Timothy gave the command to explode, and Tyler didn't have time to do anything about it. With this new skill, which Timothy had just acquired, the destroyer of worlds was finally finished. Tyler twisted his head in all directions as the dragon's levels began to transfer into Timothy's armor. The system reported that the level had been absorbed and upgraded. Timothy immediately ran to attack the enemy. The two men faced off in a powerful confrontation, neither willing to give in. To top it all off, Tyler was very surprised to learn that his opponent had been only level 21. Timothy replied that it had been true at first, but now the situation had changed a bit. He was now level 31. Tyler finally understood. He had been wondering from the very beginning how this guy had been able to overcome the monster. When he struck Timothy again, he shouted that it was all because of the boy's damned ability. The enemy attacked again and again, forced Timothy flew across the clearing. Pausing for a moment, Tyler told the boy not to even think about joking with him. Was it possible that being just one level superior, the guy thought he could handle a catastrophe rank adventurer with vast combat experience? Tyler certainly didn't think so, and he told his opponent exactly that. He threw himself into another fight, but this time Timothy skillfully avoided his blow. In a moment, the guy was behind Tyler's back and struck him with a lightning punch. Stunned, the catastrophe-ranked adventurer barely managed to repel the swift attack. This crossing of blades between the two enemies caused a huge vortex of shockwaves. Timothy didn't understand what kind of experience Tyler was talking about. Such a greedy and arrogant bastard didn't need to mention it, because in no universe was Timothy ever going to lose to this miserable lowlife. Suddenly, Tyler's armor sent up a blue wave of energy around him, and the guy pulled away from the enemy just in case. Tyler said that Timothy's armor was pretty good, but added that the guy was still talking complete nonsense, so he told him to keep quiet. After a moment, Tyler activated his unique skill, Manifestation of the Crooked God. The sight was truly incredible. As the skill was activated, Tyler immediately attacked Timothy, screaming that this was his power. The corpse collector clearly understood that if he did not avoid this energy wave right now, he would die on the spot. Timothy rushed to the side, thinking that perhaps this was the same bloody guard skill he had seen before. It was on the list, a unique skill that could only be used once. Timothy managed to jump away and save his life, but it was only a temporary prevention of harm. The guy needed to come up with something fast, so he made a purchase request. In Tyler's opinion, there was nothing Timothy could do. Tyler struck again, but Abe covered Timothy with his shield, saving his life. Since Abe was not as strong as Timothy, the shockwave carried him a long distance and he fell to the ground, suffering from pain. Pushing through it, the boy said that if Tyler had dealt with the destroyer of worlds right away, his friends would have survived. Dripping with tears, Abe shouted to Timothy to avenge his friends and to do it right now. Timothy said that of course he would, and acquired the curse of the black armor. Tyler decided to be proactive and attacked Timothy again, but this time the boy activated the power of his armor. The system notified him that the skill could only be used once and asked for confirmation of the purchase, and he fulfilled the conditions. At the same time, the request was agreed upon. The Desert Cursed was level 210, compared to Timothy's level 250. Soon after the first limb, the second one fell to the ground, and the guy wasn't going to stop there. The desert nomads came to the aid of their alpha and attacked Timothy from behind. Their speed would have been effective if the guy hadn't. The cost ranged from 1 to infinity, and there was an option to pay extra for any number of levels. Timothy immediately announced that he wanted to add more levels because he was not satisfied with just 1. The next second, the guy announced that he wanted to pay for 29 levels, which should result in a total of 100. The system accepted the purchase request, and at the same second, a beam of powerful golden energy shot up into the sky through Timothy. When it was over, with Timothy's level equal to 1, Tyler asked what the boy had just done. When he saw that Timothy was back to the first level, he laughed and said that the guy was definitely dead. Tyler could not hold back any longer and in his excitement rushed to Timothy, shouting that he was a complete idiot. The corpse collector stood calmly in place, only saying that Tyler could not defeat him. The guy activated the curse of the black armor he had just acquired, and at the same moment, darkness spread in all directions. Tyler, who was running toward the boy, suddenly realized that he could not move and was rapidly losing his strength. Timothy replied with a smile that it was a black armor curse that absorbs the opponent's level in proportion to the level spent. He also explained that he had spent 29 levels on this skill, which means that Tyler would lose the same amount. Looking carefully at his opponent, Timothy asked what he thought his level would be. Tyler was beside himself with anger. He thought that Timothy must be joking. The guy demanded his immediate release. For Timothy and Tyler, everything was quite simple, but from this moment on, everything would change dramatically. From now on, both of them would have the first level, no matter how much the adventurer with the rank of disaster would like it. Sometime later, Tyler fell to the ground, exhausted from the stress he had experienced. He thought what had happened was impossible. Looking at the monitor with his readings, the guy shouted that this was complete idiocy. No matter how much he screamed, everything remained the same. He had the first level, the 29 others were lost. Tyler called Timothy a bastard, but even with the first level as an adventurer of the disaster rank, he could still crush the enemy. But before he could reach his potential, Timothy struck him with a swift blow. Timothy said that recently, in the village of Ruru, there was a guy who was called the Corpse Collector. Because of his skill, he could not gain experience and improve his level. Unable to take the blows any longer, Tyler shouted at him to shut up and try to counterattack, but it was useless. Timothy jumped back to a safe distance and continued to talk about how the guy had always had level 1. However, now he is invincible. After everything he had been through, Timothy knew best how to win. He cut off Tyler's arm. Tyler was still on his feet. He called Timothy a bastard, but said that nothing was over yet. But Timothy disagreed with that statement. He believed that it was over and that it was clear who had won. Tyler was only more outraged by these words, and he rushed to attack his enemy's back. Timothy calmly replied that it seemed the guy had completely stopped soberly assessing the situation. Abruptly turning 180 degrees, Timothy knocked the sword out of Tyler's hand, and to seal the enemy's defeat, he dealt him a few more blows. After such a swift counterattack, Tyler fell to the ground, unable to move and bleeding. A few minutes later, Abe came up to Timothy and thanked him for making the promised revenge come true. Timothy replied that he didn't need thanks. He would never forgive him, so he would have defeated Tyler without Abe's request. In addition, Tyler was still reluctant to accept his defeat. The guy was calling out to Timothy and shouting that he had cut off his right arm, thus driving himself into a dead end. The guy said he didn't want to do it, but soon other adventurers with the catastrophe class would find out. Gritting his teeth with the last of his strength, Tyler said that if his activity stopped, it would seem suspicious and they would start searching. The guy was struggling to get to his feet. He said that these annoying adventurers were always inquisitive. Of course, they would be very interested in who defeated him and would start hunting for Timothy. "So the Black Knight is dead," Timothy calmly replied. "If anyone else challenges me, I will definitely fight them." Tyler said that the boy should pray that he would not waste all his strength. Having peacefully stopped his threats, the guy suddenly noticed that he had lost a lot of blood. Activating one of his skills, Tyler said that they would soon meet the Black Knight again. Abe, seeing this, immediately shouted that Tyler had activated the teleporter. Timothy rushed to the enemy while Abe shouted that Tyler had to be stopped. Tyler concluded by saying that he would make Timothy regret not killing him right away. Timothy looked at the column of red energy that rose to the sky and promised that next time he would be sure to finish him off. Abe didn't know what to do now. Tyler would definitely come back for them with reinforcements. But Timothy replied that everything would be fine and that they themselves needed to leave. Even if Tyler gets in his way again, Timothy will definitely overcome him. Abe was relieved and said that he was relying on Timothy in this matter. They had lost a lot of good adventurers in this battle, and they had to inform the others about the victims. Finally, Timothy had a request for Abe and wanted him to listen to it. The boys were standing in the middle of the market, ready to go, and Abe asked Timothy again if he was sure, but he didn't change his mind. Abby said that when Timothy asked him for a favor, he expected something incredible from such a strong adventurer, but instead the guy asked Abe to take him to another city. Timothy was a man who could surprise. The guy said that he would actually like to continue helping the residents of this village and remain its defender. However, for now, Timothy had attracted the attention of disaster-class adventurers, and something had to be done about it. Sooner or later, if the boy stayed here, adventurers like Tyler would find him. But Timothy would like to protect the villagers from such a threat. After listening to the boy, Abe said that he understood Timothy well, which is why he decided to listen to his request to the end. To date, they had dealt with the destroyer of worlds, and it was a worthy cause for pride. Abe said that he had already informed the guild about the losses, and about Timothy himself, showing the boy the magic communicator. If Timothy was going to leave the village, Abe asked to send a couple of adventurers to protect him. It would be safe here for a while. The guys continued to walk through the market, talking, and they didn't notice that Lindsay was watching them. She was panicking. They approached the old man's store, but it was closed. Probably it was a day off. So Abe asked if the guy wanted to say goodbye to anyone. He would have asked them what they should do. He could have negotiated and changed the day of departure. But Timothy said it was okay, they could go. If the guy saw them, it would be a painful goodbye, and it wasn't just his grandfather. Timothy also didn't want to say goodbye to Lindsay and Melissa. The guy would never forgive himself if his loved ones suffered just because they got involved with someone like him. As he approached the exit of the village, A.B. looked back and said that if Timothy left the village now, he would not be able to return here soon. The guy asked again if Timothy would regret this decision, but he firmly replied that he would not, and left the village. Suddenly, the boy heard someone calling him. It was an old man with a package, standing behind him with a smile. The old man asked why the boy had such a sad expression on his face. If he was going to leave the village, the grandfather added that he had accidentally learned about Timothy's trip and handed him a package. It was for this reason that he had decided to bake the boy some bread for the road, and he did not take no for an answer. Timothy apologized for his decision to leave the village on a whim, but his grandfather told him to smile. If he had decided to leave the village, he must have a good reason. Timothy was an adventurer, and his grandfather had always watched over him from the first day, from the beginning of his journey. At least in parting, the old man asked to be allowed to see Timothy off with a smile on his face. Timothy decided to make his grandfather happy, and with a smile said goodbye to him and left the village. Abe said that his grandfather was a good man and asked how the farewell bread tasted. The boy replied that it was incredibly delicious. Abe said that they could go now, but first, they had to visit the city where the guild he worked for was located. This was the southern headquarters of the Adventurers Guild, which was called Durham. That's how Timothy left the village of Rura behind, and new adventures awaited him. After walking a bit down the road, the boy saw a group of armed goblins attacking a cart. Abe realized that the goblins had attacked a caravan of traveling traders, but Timothy calmed him down, asking him to hold his things for a minute. The former corpse collector took out his weapon. It was time for him to raise his level before entering the city. He began to absorb the power of the goblins. These creatures did not pose a great threat to Timothy. They were level 1 and their leader was level 5. Abe looked at the scene and couldn't wait for the boy to finally show his true strength. When the job was done, the guys left behind a mountain of corpses, and their next stop was the southern city of Durham. Sometime later, Abe and Timothy entered a street in the southern city of Durham. This majestic city was located northeast of the village of Rura, a large city in the southern part of the continent. As he walked through the front gate, Timothy was struck by the large number of people around him. The atmosphere of this city was radically different from the village, but it was not surprising. After all, Durham was one of the largest cities on the continent. In the center of this city was the headquarters of the southern branch of the Central Council of the Adventurers Guild. There were many guild headquarters on the continent, with many talented adventurers as members. Abag explained that there were many talented adventurers in this city, just like Timothy. Against the background of these warriors, the guy should not stand out much unless, of course, he raised his level again. Timothy smiled when he heard this remark. Currently, his level was 1110. If not necessary, he would not raise his level. The boy looked at Ab and thanked him for his timely guidance. On the way to the city of Durham, he had actually raised his level a bit by absorbing the power of the goblins. Ab advised him to stop raising his level for now, and Timothy asked why. The guy replied that if Timothy's level was radically different from others, it would attract too much attention. You can imagine a situation, he said, where Timothy walks around the city with level 300. People will say that he's a new adventurer of disaster rank. Timothy replied that if that was the case, it would really attract the attention of disaster-rated adventurers. Abe noted that if everyone saw that the guy was the same adventurer who had defeated Tyler, many would want to compete with him. He had heard that there were a lot of centrics among adventurers with the rank of catastrophe, so it would be better not to attract the attention of strange personalities. Adventurers needed to stick together, not compete. That was Abe's opinion. When he saw a rabbit nearby, Abe reminded Timothy that adventurers were obliged to protect and preserve the peace of civilians. Timothy listened to the guy like he was mesmerized. In his opinion, Abe was a very talented adventurer. Many adventurers cared only about money and fame. Tyler was the same way. Timothy wanted to become an adventurer who would be kind and just like Abe. The fact that the guy had such a high level now meant nothing. He had to match this power and use it wisely. They continued to walk down the street, and Timothy decided to ask where exactly they were going. Abe apologized and explained that they had gotten carried away and he hadn't told Timothy they needed to report on the destroyer of worlds. So first, they would go to the guild headquarters. The guys reached their destination and approached the counter, where an employee greeted them and asked what order they wanted to report. Abe replied that he had transmitted the entire mission report via the communicator. The girl said that if so, she would give him the reward right away. Smiling, she asked him to tell her the name of the mission he had completed. After a short pause, Abe said it was the incident in the village of Rura, the destroyer of worlds. The smile immediately disappeared from the girl's face. She turned around and walked away, muttering that she would bring Abe his reward right away. After a few minutes, she returned and put several bags of gold coins on the counter. She said that this was the reward for the mission. Since all the members of Abe's group were dead, the entire reward went to the only surviving adventurer. That person was Abe, who at that moment was looking at the girl, unable to say a word. Timothy was amazed, wondering why Abe had been so depressed all the way here. It was clear now, the boy felt guilty for being the only survivor of that massacre, and this guilt tormented him. Abby eventually took the money from the counter. The employee folded her arms across her chest and expressed her sincere condolences. On their way out, Timothy asked his silent friend what the girl had said to him. Pausing, Abe replied that members of his squad had died and he, as the leader, had to take responsibility for their lives. The guys went outside and Abe stopped on the threshold. The guy sighed. The rumors had spread faster than he expected. He didn't want his problems to affect Timothy, but the crowd of adventurers who wanted him dead deprived him of that opportunity. People demanded that he meet with the families of those who died and give them the money he received for the mission. Faye decided to accept all the anger of others. He was in charge of the squad, and because of his mistake, all his comrades died. That is why, no matter what his desires were and no matter how much he regretted what he had done, he was ready to accept all the accusations. It did not change the fact of his guilt. The crowd demanded answers to their questions and accusations. In their eyes, he was an unworthy leader, and all this horror had happened because of him. After hearing the accusations, Abe replied that he took full responsibility for what had happened. He added that he was unable to save any member of his group from certain death. The guy, with tears in his eyes, continued to say that everyone who was with him had died because of his mistakes. One man in the crowd shouted that it didn't matter how much Abe regretted what he did. Suddenly, all his anger turned into tears, and he said that all those who died were the best adventurers. The guy looked up and shouted again, wondering how they could lose to a level 50 flame dragon. Timothy couldn't understand what was happening. Everyone around Abe was wrong. It was not like that at all. He knew that they were facing a world destroyer of the 300th level, and none of the adventurers were prepared to face such a destructive force. The boy couldn't stand this slander any longer. He shouted that everyone present was wrong and wanted to tell the truth, but Abe stopped him without turning around. The guy said that he was very grateful to Timothy for his concern, but he could not allow him to speak. It was his mistakes that killed the entire group of adventurers, and he really thought so. If he had ordered the evacuation of the villagers, then he could have avoided all these deaths. The boy's argument was interrupted by another adventurer from the crowd who wanted to know what they were talking about. The adventurer shouted at Abe, accusing him of sacrificing his comrades for the sake of a reward. As soon as the man finished speaking, Timothy immediately ran up to him and shouted that Abe would never do that. But the burly man looked at the boy and ordered him to shut up. He did not want to hear excuses from strangers. Timothy did not remain silent. He replied that he was not a stranger. He, along with Abe, had fought a world destroyer of the 300th level. This news caused a stir among the crowd. If it was true, their return was a miracle, and someone needed to go to the guild for details. The burly giant said that the boy was talking nonsense and revealed his level to Timothy, but a moment later he was surprised to find that Timothy had the same level as him. This giant's name was Will, and he was at level 110. Now, the man doubted that a boy with this level could survive a battle against a level 300 monster. Timothy couldn't give any details, so he simply answered that he had his reasons. This response provoked a strong reaction and laughter from the man, who thought Timothy was making it all up. The giant told Timothy to go away, but Timothy replied that he could only be forced to do so. Both of them were stubborn. A moment later, their swords were drawn and clashed. The first attack kicked up a lot of dust. Appy, covering his face, asked Timothy to stop, saying that it was all his fault. He couldn't save his comrades and brothers in arms, and he considered himself a terrible leader. The fight didn't stop, no matter how much Abby wanted it to. Neither of the opponents was willing to retreat. Timothy shouted that it was all a lie. Yes, all of the boy's friends had died. That was a fact. But there were important details being ignored. Continuing to attack, Timothy said that no one could have foreseen such a tragic ending. Abe had stayed with his comrades to the very end. Even in the face of death, he didn't run away or abandon them. Timothy knocked the sword out of his enemy's hands with a lightning-fast strike, and it stuck in the cracks of the pavement. In conclusion, Timothy said that someone who had arranged all these deaths for the sake of a reward would never mourn his friends like this. Abe was not a bad leader at all. If he wanted to take responsibility for the deaths of his comrades, Timothy wouldn't object, but personally he believed it was wrong to take responsibility for everything, as much of it had been completely out of Abe's control. That was why Timothy wanted to protect Abe from such thoughts. He turned to his friend and called him a leader who, despite the situation, had not abandoned his comrades and had avenged their deaths. Abel, with tears in his eyes, looked at the boy and asked why he was helping him. Timothy extended his hand and told him that he was the ideal adventurer he aspired to be. That was the reason. But the burly giant did not want to be defeated. Pulling out a knife, he attacked Timothy from behind. Abe, seeing this, tried to warn the boy. Timothy looked back, but the danger was suddenly gone. Behind him, a dapper adventurer had appeared and placed his sword at Will's neck, stopping his cowardly attack. The unexpected appearance of the stranger made Timothy tense. He felt a terrible aura around the man and wondered who he was. But Abe stopped Timothy and told him he could put his sword down. The man was his colleague. He was known as the Supreme Adventurer of the Sword of Salvation Guild. His name was Mr. Lyall, and he was level 200. Timothy breathed a sigh of relief. It turned out to be Abe's friend. Lyall asked if this was the same Timothy, and Abe confirmed it. He said that Timothy had saved him in the battle against the Destroyer of Worlds. Not only had he saved him, but they had defeated the monster together. After a short pause, Lyall added that this was not the end. The two had also encountered that bastard Tyler along the way. Impressed, Timothy asked how Lyall knew about him. Abe replied that he had told Lyall everything that had happened in the village. He also added that because of this he had reported his encounters with Tyler to the central leadership and the guild master. It was because of Tyler that the Destroyer of Worlds had not been killed in time, which had caused a lot of problems. But thanks to Timothy, they had managed to kill the dragon, something that wouldn't have happened if Tyler had destroyed the core when he had the chance. Tyler had known about it perfectly well. That's why after these events, a bounty was placed on his head too. Lyall said he had only recently arrived in the city. He had been on an expedition and could not come to the aid of their group earlier. Abe had reported everything that happened after the expedition was over. As soon as the head of the guild learned the details, he came to Durham immediately. But now a bunch of idiots were accusing the squad leader of the deaths of his comrades, without even investigating the situation or learning all the facts. Lyall was very familiar with the pain felt by the families and friends of the adventurers who had died. No words or money could bring back lost lives, but everyone here was an adventurer. They were obliged to keep the citizens calm. Lyall clenched his fist and added that every time adventurers risked their lives for the benefit of others, all the boys and girls who died knew what they were doing when they became adventurers. It was their destiny. And what everyone here was doing now was shifting responsibility to those who had fought alongside their loved ones to the very end. Having made this passionate speech, Lyall wished to end the conversation on this note. Timothy, who had been listening to Lyall without saying a word, now decided to ask Abe if he was a good man. Abe told him not to have any doubts, but added that Lyall was a pretty tough chairman. Waiting for the crowd to disperse, Lyall turned sharply toward Abe and announced without preamble that he was kicking him out of the guild. The man explained that even though he had resolved the misunderstanding, the boy's incompetence could not be justified. He could not leave a leader who had doomed an entire team to death in one of Durham's strongest guilds, the Sword of Salvation. Timothy was amazed. Was the guy really a member of the strongest guild in the city? Was it really that first class? Lyall, meanwhile, apologized to Abe, saying he didn't see any other choice, though he imagined Abe might have some objections to it. But Abe said he didn't have any. He just wanted to ask Lyall for a favor in the end. Putting his hand on Timothy's shoulder, he asked if the candidate could be accepted into the Sword of Salvation Guild. If Timothy could find allies in the guild, he could achieve great results in the future, benefiting the city. Abe sincerely believed that even though he had been expelled, Timothy had every prospect of becoming a first-class adventurer. Just as Lyall was about to agree, Timothy interrupted the conversation. He said he was against letting Abe be irrevocably expelled from the guild, but also that he would never agree to join a guild that abandons its own comrades. Abe tried to reassure Timothy, saying that if he joined the guild, he would be able to enlist the support of various people. Moreover, Abe knew that Timothy himself wanted to actively help others, so he should join the guild. After listening to his friend's arguments, Timothy replied that in that case he would create a guild himself with his own hands. Sometime later, the boys were walking side by side in the narrow streets of Durham, not carrying many things. Eventually, they arrived at a dilapidated tower. Timothy stopped, amazed. After looking at the questionable piece of architecture, he asked Abe if this was really the right place for them. Abe answered in the affirmative and added that this is where the story of Timothy's guild would begin. This tower would be their base. Despite its appearance, it had potential. He decided to thank Timothy once again for inviting him to join the guild. He announced the creation of his own guild immediately after Abe's expulsion. At that very moment, Abe became the first member of the new guild, right in front of Lyall. Timothy was well aware that he had a lot to learn from Abe, so he didn't want to hear him say thank you. The boy knew that, in order to become a first-class adventurer like Abe, he would be happy to receive any advice on the matter. Timothy also realized that even though they had their own base, they would still have to rebuild it from scratch. They were still not officially considered a guild, and they didn't have much money. Abe said he had to give away most of the money to buy the building. Their reward for the destruction of the Destroyer of Worlds, although large, was mostly given to the families of those who had died on that expedition. He thought the money would be enough for everything, but he had miscalculated. Just like Timothy, who upon opening a closet kicked up a pile of dust over his head. With the money they had left, they bought the building to open their own guild, but things were not going well. Armed this time with rags and buckets of water, the guys finally began the general cleaning. A few minutes passed and Abe was already trying to warn Timothy of danger again. While washing the floor, Timothy slipped on the water he was pouring and fell face first into a puddle. This situation made both friends laugh. They laughed out loud, unable to stop. In that moment, Timothy realized that ever since he received this armor, his whole life had turned into a battlefield, but he also missed those peaceful days. Suddenly, the boy's joy was interrupted by the sound of the door swiftly opening. A woman's voice apologized. When Timothy got to his feet, he was surprised to see Lindsay and Melissa in the room, looking at him with concern. Lindsay shouted that the guy just wanted to get rid of them. Melissa, sadly, said that Timothy had left without even saying goodbye. Without waiting for Timothy's response, both girls rushed at him without any explanation or warning. Meanwhile, one of the adventurers was running rapidly toward the city. He had an urgent message. If there were any free adventurers in Durham, they had to go to the western gate of the city immediately. Some volunteers responded at once. Behind the western gate, the warriors were waiting for the rapidly advancing monsters. As the first volunteers rushed through the gate, they saw a giant monster with a victim in its mouth, begging for salvation. But it was all vain. Stunned, The adventurers froze in place as they had not expected to see so many enemies. The monster, having eaten the boy, turned its face toward the newcomers, squealing happily. Lindsay and Melissa pounced on Timothy with questions, wondering why he had just left the village. The guy was unable to tolerate such interrogation from two angry girls at once. The interrogation was interrupted by the cry of an adventurer who sounded the alarm, shouting that a crowd of monsters had appeared at the western gate. All the adventurers who heard him now had to immediately approach the western gate. Timothy breathed a sigh of relief and turned to Abe. It was time for them to move. Turning to the girls, Timothy announced that he would tell them the reason he had decided to leave the village later. For now, he wanted Melissa and Lindsay to wait patiently for him here. Without waiting for an answer, Timothy headed for the exit. Their first mission as the new Durham Guild was starting now. Meanwhile, the first adventurers who had run out of the city faced a horde of monsters, one of which was gigantic. A giant monster was stepping on people and making terrifying sounds. It was a desert cursed of the 10th level. Will was the first to jump into the fray. He was level 11 and the man thought the monsters were impudent puppies, simple cursed nomads of the 20th level. They were an unequal enemy for him, but there were many such skeletons, all of them armed with swords, pushing the adventurers back toward the entrance of the city. Despite this, Will held on. He shouted that no matter what his opponents thought, they would never overwhelm him with numbers. Will rushed to the attack, and in a few minutes the skeletons were finished. The man wondered where Lyall was. One of his comrades replied that Lyall had been sent for, but he still wasn't there. Will said that if this continued, they would have to attack without him. The man was so engrossed in the conversation that he lost his vigilance and did not notice how the giant monster appeared behind him. When he looked back, he saw a large number of blue energy balls soaring into the sky above the crowd of adventurers. In a moment, each of the energy balls found its victim. The adventurers' bodies went limp. They could not move. Will realized that the attack hadn't done any damage yet, but the man knew that the spell added to the energy balls was a desert curse. Will realized he could no longer move any part of his body, but he could still see the skeletons coming at him. At this rate, one of them would kill him, especially since they weren't that far away. Suddenly, the cursed nomad's attack was interrupted by Timothy, who ran at him and smashed him to pieces. A moment after the skeleton was destroyed, Timothy was notified by the system that the next level had been absorbed. The boy called out to Abbott, who was also nearby, fighting a small group of damned nomads. Timothy said it was time for them both to improve their skills, and now they had plenty of opportunities to do so. Beb replied that in the current environment, Timothy could safely let himself go. From that moment on, the skeletons' heads fell like apples from trees, and the system didn't even have time to notify them about the levels being absorbed. Soon, Timothy had already reached the 250th level. Abe shouted that the guy could leave the skeletons to him. Timothy knew he could rely on Abe to always have his back, and now he had one goal left. His target was the alpha monster, the one who had been sending curses and had already cursed several adventurers. Rushing at the monster, Timothy shouted that this time the curse would have to be borne by the desert cursed himself. With a smile on his face, the boy said he would be very eager to find out how the monster would cope with his curse. Meanwhile, Lyall, whom no one could find, had gone outside the city through the eastern gate. While the horde of monsters was attacking from the west, he had decided to check the eastern gate as well, but he could not have imagined that he would meet another army of monsters there. The eyes of the monster and Lyall crossed. The adventurer was 10 levels behind the monster. A moment later, the desert curse activated. The energy balls carrying the spell soared again. But Lyall said that even if all the monsters fought against him alone, they shouldn't think they could easily defeat him. The head of the guild admitted that, as his opponent, the desert curse deserved to be captured. But unfortunately, no matter what army the monster assembled, it would not be enough to defeat Lyall. A second later, Lyall activated the legendary demonic coming skill. He shouted that the lives of the monsters would end in exactly 5 seconds. At the western gate, Timothy was fighting with the desert cursed, saying that it was the monster's turn to feel the curse. The guy struck the first blow, cutting off a limb. He was very curious how the desert cursed would cope with an opponent like him. The desert cursed was level 210 compared to Timothy's level 250. Soon after the first limb, the second one fell to the ground, and the guy wasn't going to stop there. The desert nomads came to the aid of their alpha and attacked Timothy from behind. Their speed would have been effective if the guy hadn't. He had been so fast that he instantly jumped to the side and launched a counterattack. Timothy was even a little disappointed, as if this was all these monsters could offer him. The guy realized that his opponents had no chance against him. They would all die now. Another level was absorbed, and it was quite easy for him to reach the 290th level in this battle, but there was still an obstacle in the form of a giant monster who wanted him dead. The desert cursed swung at Timothy with its remaining limbs, trying to grab him, but the boy deftly dodged the claws. Realizing that it would not be able to capture the enemy, the desert cursed fired energy balls with spells in his direction. Abe, who saw this, began to worry about Timothy. He warned the boy not to touch those bullets, but Timothy reassured his friend, activated the power of his sword, and said that everything was fine. A moment later, a protective sphere of energy formed around Timothy, and he knew that the desert cursed would never hit him. The two friends were so engrossed in the battle that they did not notice the eyes of the other adventurers watching them, including Will. While the adventurers who were conscious were trying to figure out who he was, Will recognized the scumbag he had fought in the square. After a series of lightning attacks, the desert cursed fell to the ground, draining the liquid that had kept him alive. Timothy said that the monster had cursed many innocent people and asked if he was satisfied with himself. The guy's answer didn't matter. Regardless, the desert cursed would die right now. Suddenly, the monster released hundreds of energy balls with a spell into the sky, which hovered in place. Timothy did not understand what was happening. The desert cursed screeched loudly, and the energy balls flew rapidly toward the city of Durham. Timothy was angry with himself for letting his guard down, and with one blow, he sliced open the skull of the desert cursed. The boy realized that the monster's curse was originally aimed at the city of Durham. Local residents saw unexplained objects in the sky above them that were rapidly approaching, and no one knew what they were. Timothy realized that the locals' innocent people were the true targets of these monsters, and that the monster's plan had already begun to take effect. While the boy was recovering from the shock, the system informed him that the level of the desert cursed had been absorbed, and Timothy's level was now 500. Abe, who had dealt with his own opponents, approached the boy and said that things were bad. The monster was not as dangerous as its curse. The curse of the desert cursed was not easy to get rid of. The victim faces a slow and painful death. Because of the monster's last attack, most of the town's people must have suffered from the curse. Timothy asked if there was anyone in town who could break the curse, but Abe said that only high-level magicians could do it. However, there was a caveat. In the strongest guild in Durham, the Sword of Salvation, there were only 3 mages with this level. Timothy was surprised by this news, as if there were only 3 powerful wizards in the entire city. Ab assured him that he knew only 3 mages who could cope with the curse of such a monster. The guy's conversation was interrupted by newcomers who ran up to the cursed adventurers and asked how they were feeling. They were the same magicians, and they asked the victims to be patient. A cure would come soon. One of the magicians called for Miss Helen and said that the curse was quite serious, but they still had a chance to save the adventurers. Helen, who was also hurrying to the cursed, shouted that it was good. Everyone should focus on supporting their injured comrades. She would never let anyone die today. Helen was a high sorceress from the Sword of Salvation Guild. Abe repeated what he had said earlier. He knew of only 3 mages who could deal with the curse, and they were the ones. But the problem was that the number of victims of this incident was growing every second, and at this rate, the magicians would not have time to save everyone. Suddenly, Helen shuddered and grabbed her hand. She didn't understand what kind of curse it was. Even though she could dispel it, it would take longer than she had thought. It wasn't just her friends who suffered, but most of the victims were local residents, and that was the most outrageous thing to her. Helen wanted to save everyone and considered it her duty. Suddenly, the sorceress recoiled from a powerful energy beam that pierced the adventurer she was healing. Timothy knew that if he stood out too much, he would not be able to avoid meeting with the disaster-ranked adventurers, but even though he understood this, there was a reason why he could not leave the adventurers in trouble. The guy's level had transformed. Timothy received the unique skill Heavenly Good. He asked Abe if he had done the right thing. Abe broke into a smile and answered, "Why are you asking me that? It was a really good cause." Timothy, having reactivated the skill, aimed his hands at another adventurer. Soon, each of the cursed was touched by the miraculous energy of the adventurer Timothy. The amazed Helen looked at the scene and could not believe that the boy had removed the curse from every injured adventurer. She looked back at the guy and asked, "Who are you?" But Timothy didn't have time to discuss such nonsense. He promised to talk to Helen about it later. For now, there was a curse raging in Durham. Walking to the western gate, Timothy said they had to save the locals and asked if the girl was coming with them. Helen immediately agreed, hurrying to join her new friends. She said that she was one of the strongest wizards in the guild and it was her duty to help the victims. Meanwhile, in the city, the curse of the desert cursed had already consumed all the inhabitants. Timothy activated his skill. They had very little time to save the locals from death. Sometime later, Timothy was looking at the monitor. Many people had suffered because of his mistake, and he wanted to save everyone. He decided to use the special skill Heavenly Blessing, and the system informed him that the request was completed and the skill was ready to use. At the eastern gate, Lyall finished the battle with his alpha monster and sheathed his sword. Looking up, the man saw that while he was defending the eastern borders, Timothy had not been wasting time. The guy ran at maximum speed through the streets of Durham, dispersing the benefits of his skill on the victims. Helen couldn't keep up with his speed, so she approached each of the bewitched people and asked if they were okay. One by one, the victims regained consciousness and tried to answer. Helen still couldn't believe what she was seeing. The stranger had completely erased all possible effects of the curse. In her opinion, it was brilliant. But Ab didn't think so. The number of victims was too high. He was afraid that no matter how hard Timothy tried, he would not be able to save everyone. Eventually, Timothy realized that casualties were unavoidable. Despite his best efforts, he managed to remove only a small part of the curse. He decided to ask the system if there was any way to increase the radius of the heavenly good skill. The system accepted the query and started searching for answers while the boy continued to run. Finally, it responded. The system recommended using the territory expansion skill, which could increase the effect of special skills. Timothy read that Wings of Seraphim was an improved version of Heavenly Good, a skill that casts holy magic on weapons to cleanse the area of a curse. The system was waiting for a request to use a special skill, so Timothy decided not to delay and activated it. In a moment, everything around the boy was illuminated by a blue light. He was holding a winged sword in his hand, and the holy magic was activated. Timothy announced a request to use the skill to cleanse the entire city of the curse. A pillar of energy burst from the sword, split into parts, and found each victim, eventually engulfing the entire city in its radiance. Finally, Timothy was caught up by Abe and Helen, both of whom were surprised by the sight. Helen could not believe it. She was seeing holy magic with her own eyes. The girl was very curious to know whether Timothy was really a simple adventurer or a saint. The guy replied that he was no saint, but he would do everything possible to save the people of Durham. Unfortunately, he was just an ordinary adventurer. Timothy needed Alba's advice. He couldn't make an informed decision on his own. The guy folded his arms shyly and said that he might have gone a little overboard. He wanted to save the city's residents, but he had forgotten that he was supposed to be hiding his power. Now, adventurers of the catastrophe rank would likely appear. The boy needed rescuing again, and Abe looked at Helen with a smile. She didn't understand what he was getting at. Abe's thought was simple. They could pin all of Timothy's exploits on this cute mage girl. When it was all over and the residents were healed, they gathered outside the guild building, waiting for their hero. Soon the door opened and Helen appeared in the doorway. The girl seemed to be illuminated by divine light. People began to chant that she was the lady who had saved Durham from a terrible curse, their divine heroine to whom everyone was indebted. A little while later, at the central headquarters of the Adventurers Guild, the girl made a report on everything that had happened. She said that she had done everything as agreed. They defended the city from monsters and she saved the inhabitants from the curse using holy magic. Timothy was sincerely grateful to the girl for her help, but he did not become the hero who had single-handedly saved the people of Durham from the curse. Instead, Ebia had suggested in time that they attribute all the feats of the day to Helen, the strongest mage in the guild. It didn't seem suspicious. Helen said that she still had to write a detailed report on what happened, and the guys assured her that they would help with it. Timothy once again apologized to the girl for putting all these worries on her shoulders, but Helen said that everything was fine. The boy had saved all the residents from this unspeakable horror. She wanted him to accept this as repayment for saving the victims. From now on, he could count on any help from her. The guys looked at each other and liked the idea. Ab said that the guild seemed to have gained more members because of the stories about the heroine who saved the city, but the girl told him to be quiet. She didn't like being called that. Abs thought it was only natural. Helen was one Helen was one of the best mages in the guild, so the title of divine heroine who saved the city suited her. The most important thing in Ab's opinion was not to pretend, but to believe the lie himself. The divine heroine gave the residents confidence that they would always be protected by someone like Helen. Timothy, in the opinion of both boys, was not suitable for this role at all. That's why Abe decided to summarize that Helen was destined to play such a responsible role. The girl blushed. The word role seemed rather pretentious to her. She didn't consider herself an actress. Timothy asked Abe if he was sure the plan would work, and Abe once again answered in the affirmative. He was confident that thanks to Timothy's incredible abilities, they could make Helen a living legend in Durham. The girl magician simply could not stand all these grandiose plans of the boys, but no one listened to her. Abba grabbed Helen's hand and dragged her to a secluded spot, with Timothy trailing behind. Abba wanted Timothy to give the girl holy power so that the townspeople wouldn't be suspicious. If they wanted to maintain Helen's status as the divine heroine, she needed to be given that same divinity. Fear settled in the girl's eyes, and she asked how Timothy was going to give her the power if he was going to shoot holy light at her. Timothy simply apologized for what he was about to do and assured her that he wouldn't harm her. Everything would be fine. Finally, Timothy said that if Helen didn't want it, he would understand and they would go their separate ways. After some thought, the girl replied that she had already said she could be counted on. Timothy had saved lives in front of her, so she trusted his decisions. The guy came closer to her and thanked her once again for her service. If Helen allowed him, he could no longer hold back. A second later, the girl was illuminated by a golden divine light that almost knocked her down. Timothy had activated the wings of Seraphim and shared them with his accomplice. Now people were already cradling Helen in their arms, calling her a divine heroine who illuminated them with warmth and light. Abe turned to Timothy and asked if he could spin Helen in the air. The guy replied that it was too hard to control. He still hadn't learned how to properly use the skill. Unexpectedly, Timothy had just realized something important. Abe actually seemed to enjoy this whole absurd situation. The guy said that no one knew the truth yet, but Timothy had stood out too much today, and in the future, he should be more careful. Their conversation was suddenly interrupted by Lyall, who had noticed them and asked if he would be intruding. Abe looked frightened. It was the head of his former clan, someone they had not expected to see now. Despite the boys' alarm, Lyall asked Timothy to come with him for a few words. There was something they needed to discuss. Timothy, still holding the divine sword and unable to move, simply smiled shyly. Lyall said that the guy probably took him for an idiot, but he knew who the real hero was who had saved Durham, and it was definitely not Helen. Timothy was amazed that Lyall seemed to know everything. He had hoped to keep it a secret. Lyall watched as people tossed Helen into the air and said that he wasn't going to condemn Timothy's methods. He understood that the role of the hero needed to be filled by someone familiar to the residents of Durham. However, the boys had been seen by other adventurers fighting at the Western Gate. Not only adventurers from the Sword of Salvation Guild took part in that great battle. Abe never would have thought that Lyall would care about such a detail, or that the man would want to talk to them in person about something so trivial. But Lyall denied it. He said he didn't care how many adventurers had seen Timothy in action and wasn't going to scold him for it. Abe hung back a bit, unsure what exactly the conversation was about. Lyall said that when the monsters attacked the Western Gate, the boys had no idea what was happening at the Eastern Gate. It was a rhetorical question because the boys truly didn't know what had happened on the other side of Durham. They wanted more information. Lyall wasn't at all surprised that no one knew. What happened at the Eastern Gate had been quickly hushed up because only the adventurers of the Sword of Salvation Guild were there. After some thought, Abe finally asked the question, what exactly happened on the other side of Durham? Lyall looked sternly at the boys and said that a whole horde of cursed monsters had gathered at the Western Gate, that the same thing had happened at the Eastern Gate. The same army of monsters was there. According to the man, the whole attack was carefully planned. This news caused shock and outrage in Timothy. At the same time, he asked if there had been any victims at the Eastern Gate. Lyall replied no. Timothy shouldn't worry, he had been there himself and destroyed all the monsters in time. None of them had managed to hurt anyone. It was to be expected from the supreme adventurer of one of the most famous guilds on the continent. Lyall had checked another gate, and without his help they wouldn't have been able to deal with such an army. But he emphasized there were more serious problems than just the battle. The head of the Sword of Salvation Guild believed that the attack had been organized from two sides simultaneously. The monsters were incapable of planning well enough to orchestrate such a coordinated assault on their own. A human-organized attack was highly likely. This information made the boys instantly fall silent. They had never thought about the mechanics of monster behavior, and the idea came as a surprise. AB thought about it for a while and admitted that a lot about the attack didn't add up. He had been living in Durham for a long time, but he had never seen monsters like those before. He also found their behavior strange and said he had asked other adventurers if they had encountered anything similar, but no one had. Timothy asked if this was really so unusual, and Abe replied that such monsters didn't live in these parts. Given their size, hostility, and power, it would be nearly impossible not to run into them if they were native. It was strange that such a creature had shown up next to Durham at all. After the explanation, Lyall decided to summarize. He added that these monsters, in other words, were summoned by someone. If a person possessed a special skill or magic, they could easily summon monsters into an army. Timothy was amazed. It meant that someone really wanted to destroy the city of Durham. If someone was truly plotting something so insidious, then all adventurers needed to strengthen the city's defenses. This was exactly what Lyall had wanted to talk about. He wanted Timothy to create his own guild as soon as possible so he could fight side by side with the Sword of Salvation Guild. Abba pointed out that, for the time being, they couldn't officially register a guild. There was a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy involved. Lyall replied that he was ready to help the boys by making arrangements with the central government. In return, he wanted two promises from Timothy. The first was a promise to support cooperation between their guilds as a direct founder. The second was a promise that Lyall could personally evaluate Timothy's skills in a training match to ensure he was truly competent. Lyall asked if the boy could handle these conditions. Without hesitation, Timothy agreed. The head of the Sword of Salvation Guild was very impressed with Timothy's commitment and attitude. They were at the central council building of the Adventurers Guild at the training ground, and Lyall allowed Timothy to use any weapon he wanted. The man wanted to see the true power of the Dark Horse, Timothy, and to finally show his own. The fight was to be with real weapons and abilities, and the goal was to truly defeat the opponent. A blue aura shone around Lyall, and he told Timothy to show him everything he had. Timothy also released his aura, turning his side of the room red. He understood his opponent's intent. AB, standing between Lyall and Timothy, raised his hands and signaled the start of the match. As soon as he lowered them and gave the command, the boy and the man rushed toward each other. Lyall sincerely hoped Timothy would survive against his sword. The two began to attack and defend in turn, gradually closing the distance. Despite all the skills he had acquired, Timothy was only at level 100. It was extremely difficult for him as his opponent Lyall, the head of the Sword of Salvation Guild, was level 200. The guy realized that victory in this sparring match was doomed from the start. With such a gap in levels, defeating Lyall was impossible. Timothy also realized that Lyall was fully aware of this. Still, the cards had been dealt. In this case, the former corpse collector decided his task was not to win, but to show his best. If Lyall wanted to see his true abilities, Timothy would definitely demonstrate them. The boy managed to break through Lyall's counterattack and crossed swords with him. In a moment, his sword was knocked from his hands and Timothy gritted his teeth. He had never been disarmed so quickly, but he had a trick up his sleeve. He summoned the Sword of Seraphim and attacked again. Lyall barely avoided being wounded. For the third time, the guy rushed forward in an indirect trajectory, but Lyall knocked another sword out of his hands with a lightning-fast swing. The man really liked the boy's persistence. Timothy didn't waste a second. Drawing a dagger, he tried to wound Lyall for the fourth time. Unable to land a blow at first, he continued to deliver swift attacks in the hope that one would succeed. When Lyall flew back to a safe distance to preserve his body's integrity, Timothy threw a dagger in his direction. Lyall had no trouble repelling what he thought was a naive attack. But while the head of the Sword of Salvation Guild was busy with such a trifle, Timothy managed to retrieve Seraphim's sword and flew over Lyall's head. The boy reasoned that even if the difference in their levels was too great, he hoped the man would enjoy. They fought to the fullest. The guy pointed his sword at the enemy and made his move. Lyall disappeared in a powerful energy beam that scattered stones in all directions. Abe was delighted. Despite the obvious difference in levels between the two, Timothy's fighting skills as an adventurer had definitely improved. He was watching the guy who landed on the ground in front of the fire he had lit himself. Meanwhile, Timothy looked at the traces left by his punch, realizing that this was the maximum he was capable of at the moment. He wondered what Lyall thought. A few seconds passed and Mr. Lyall finally appeared in the smoke, bloody and shaken by what had just happened to him. Staring at Timothy, he said that if it weren't for the level difference, he would have died from such a direct blow. In his opinion, the entire fight and Timothy's persistence were commendable, and there was no doubt about the guy's fighting skill. Lyall announced that they would now move on to the next part of their match. This time, Timothy would have to defend himself. The guy couldn't understand why his opponent's mood suddenly changed so drastically. Lyall now had a killer attitude. Abby also noticed the sudden shift and realized that Lyall wanted to use a legendary skill against Timothy. At that moment, a shockwave rose around Lyall from the activation of the legendary demonic coming skill. The man was laughing, shouting that this was now a fight to the death. If Timothy didn't stop him, the guy's life would end in exactly 15 seconds. Timothy could also see that Lyall had activated a legendary skill, but he hadn't yet realized just how powerful it would make him. Abe was extremely worried about his friend. He shouted to Timothy to be careful and informed him that this skill of Lyall's would double the user's level for 15 seconds. Timothy was stunned. Did Ab mean that Mr. Lyall's level was now 400? Unfortunately, Ab was right. Things had become very difficult. Meanwhile, Lyall was growing more and more filled with indescribable rage and power. He thundered throughout the room that his blood was boiling in his veins. He hadn't fought an adventurer near his strength in a long time. Initially, this fight was meant to test Timothy's abilities, but now Lyall wanted to truly enjoy himself during these 15 seconds. He was delighted by this boy who had met and even surpassed all the expectations of the head of the Sword of Salvation Guild. A demon had been sleeping inside Lyall all this time, waiting for a worthy opponent, and now no one could stop him. While Lyall was making his speech, he let his guard down and delivered a sudden kick to Timothy's body. Timothy, suffering from indescribable pain, flew rapidly across the room, unable to resist. Before Abe's amazed eyes, the guy smashed through the wall and was thrown out of the fight hall. The crowd, still cheering their hero, stood in the square in front of the building. Helen, looking at Timothy's fall, didn't understand what was happening. Meanwhile, Lyall wasn't going to let the guy go so easily. He still had 10 seconds left and wondered whether Timothy could withstand another powerful attack. The countdown continued, and at the 9th second, Timothy began descending to the ground. His strength and consciousness nearly gone, the guy felt his mind slipping away. He was falling, wondering how he could have lost so suddenly. Then, Timothy heard someone calling his name from below. It was Melissa and Lindsay. Their faces were filled with worry. The two had suddenly shown up at his guild and bombarded him with questions. And suddenly Timothy remembered he had a guild. He saw Helen in the crowd and remembered saying goodbye to her before meeting Mr. Lyall. It was to protect the city and the people he loved that he had decided to found his own guild. While Timothy was thinking about all of this, Lyall nearly caught up to him mid-fall, still holding his sword with the last of his strength. The former corpse collector tried to resist. He swung his blade several times at the enemy, managing to slow him down. Lyall rejoiced. His inner demon had finally fought for real. Only against strong opponents could he reveal his true self, and he hadn't done so in a very long time. But unfortunately for both Timothy and Lyall, the story was about to reach its end. The man used a demonic black flash. The attack knocked the sword of Seraphim out of Timothy's hands, and the boy was nearly in despair. In the end, he admitted aloud that he was still far from Lyall's level and that he had lost this battle. But despite everything, Timothy promised that he would survive. At that moment, the system informed him that the explosion of the sacred weapon would protect him from the opponent's attack. Within a second of this announcement, Timothy shouted for the holy sword of the Seraphim's wings to explode. The weapon immediately obeyed its master's command and exploded between him and Lyall, forming a protective shield against the latter's devastating blow. Despite this, Timothy was still hit by the shockwave and began falling rapidly toward the ground. But at least now Lyall had been slowed down. The guy plummeted from a great height and struck the pavement, sending shards flying in all directions. With the last of his strength, Timothy begged his armor to restore. Timothy focused on Seraphim's sword and searched for a skill that would help him get another weapon into his hands. The system emphasized that Timothy needed to retreat immediately, but the guy already knew this without prompting. Still, he couldn't run away. Timothy wanted to fight. He needed new swords, and the system informed him that there were two epic skills that matched his request: weapon restoration and quick weapon repair. They cost 90 levels and Timothy bought them immediately. The system accepted his request and confirmed the purchase. A few seconds later, swords returned to both of his hands. Timothy crossed them and called out to Lyall, inviting him to the offensive and promising to cool his temper with his deadly blades. Timothy realized that if he could hold out just a little longer, he could definitely defeat his opponent. But the world was already spinning, turning into a continuous wave. Falling to the ground, the guy was still forcing himself to fight, but it was no use. He lay face down at Lyall's feet. Lyall calmly walked up to Timothy, looked down at him, and after a few seconds, said that the boy needed to rest properly. Sometime later, Timothy woke up from a nightmare. He jumped up in bed and shouted that he could still fight. Looking around, he realized that he was at his guild base, surrounded by his comrades. Melissa took Timothy's hand, clearly worried. She explained that she and Lindsay had gone shopping for dinner, and that was when they saw him falling from the top of the tower. Looking into Timothy's face, Melissa asked how he was feeling. The guy looked at her carefully and finally understood how the girls had ended up in the square at that moment. Their conversation was interrupted by Lindsay, who suddenly ran up to them. She said that everyone had been worried about Timothy and pointed out that he had been hit hard. Helen added that their duel with Mr. Lyall had damaged the tower of the guild's headquarters, asking whether they had thought about what they were doing. After listening to all his friends' emotional monologues, Timothy humbly apologized for making them worry. Still, the main question on his mind was whether he had passed the test. The answer came directly from Mr. Lyall, who appeared at the doorway and said that the boy had passed the exam. Timothy was thrilled by the man's appearance. Lyall explained that 15 seconds had already passed before Timothy lost consciousness. The head of the Sword of Salvation Guild added that he had put all his skill and determination into those 15 seconds. He noted that Timothy was the first adventurer to survive that span of time and be only slightly injured. This news made Timothy incredibly happy. He almost lost his mind from the joy. The condition was fulfilled. Abby asked Lyall if he had anything else to share with his friend. Lyall admitted that he had acted immaturely by using a legendary skill during a sparring match. His emotions had gotten the better of his judgment, and that was why Timothy had been hurt. Lyall sincerely regretted how things had turned out. Abby added that both of them wanted to protect the city, but instead, Lyall had almost killed the guy. In Ab's opinion, Lyall's remorse wasn't enough. He insisted that the head of the Sword of Salvation Guild offer a proper apology to Timothy. Lyall chuckled a little, then apologized again, adding that Timothy had successfully passed the first part of the test. As soon as Timothy had rested and regained his strength, he would begin the second part of the challenge. They would need to clear one of the dungeons together. Timothy had already guessed it. Lyall confirmed his suspicions and added that the dungeon was located in the underground ruins east of Durham, in the desert. Adventurers who knew about the place called it the Old Witch's Workshop. Helen's jaw dropped in surprise. She asked if it was that old witch's workshop she was thinking of. She explained that a very powerful witch had once lived in those ruins. After her death, however, the place had become overrun with monsters. Timothy, fascinated by the story, asked what kind of monsters lived there, but Lyall, looking directly at him, said that the rating and types of monsters were unknown to anyone. Helen added that, over the past few years, unusual magical anomalies had started emanating from the workshop. Because of these anomalies, the monsters had become stronger and more aggressive, and many merchants traveling to Durham were attacked. Lyall explained that no one had ever discovered the source of these anomalies. All they knew was that the disturbances came from a monster that had taken up residence in the ruins. Guild wizards concluded that the level of the monster was around 300. Timothy thought about it. A level 300 monster was much higher than the desert cursed. Lyall said that the ruins themselves weren't inherently dangerous. No adventurer had ever reached their depths. However, the man believed that Timothy would be able to handle the task, as he had already passed the first part of the test. Lyall wanted Timothy to investigate the old witch's workshop and destroy the monster responsible for the magical anomalies. The head of the Sword of Salvation Guild clenched his fist and asked the boy if he accepted the challenge. Meanwhile, deep within the ruins, a giant pendulum began to swing from side to side. Its movement illuminated a figure sitting at the center of a massive library. Suddenly, the figure stirred. It was an old witch, and she had begun to awaken. The monster opened its eyes. When she looked up, she sensed that some snot-nosed kids had tried to break into her room again. The witch's anger grew along with the lightning she emitted around her. The magical creature was ready to kill the uninvited guests. After recovering, Timothy immediately set off for the desert east of Durham, eager to fulfill his mission as quickly as possible. After traveling through the desert for some time, the group of adventurers finally arrived at the entrance to the old witch's workshop. When the friends looked inside, they saw the remains of adventurers scattered across the floor, long since reduced to skeletons. Timothy was the first to descend into the dungeon. He asked Lindsay if she was really sure she wanted to go with them. The girl smiled sweetly at him and winked. She was 100% confident in her decision. Even though she was only a 10th level novice adventurer, Lindsay wanted to help Timothy in his adventures and had received a beginner adventurer's license from the central office. Lindsay knew why Timothy had left their village, and she had decided to let him know. When Timothy had been unconscious, Ebbe had told them everything. The girl believed Timothy was an incredibly kind person, so kind that in order not to bring harm to the villagers, he had simply chosen to leave. Now, Lindsay's biggest dream was to become as strong as Timothy. That's why she wanted to travel with their band of adventurers. Timothy noticed that the old witch's workshop was a very dangerous place to begin one's journey, and the girl was only level 10. But Lindsay, waving her arms hysterically, shouted that Timothy himself had also been level 10 when he left. The guy tried to explain to her, but she cut him off, saying she had already found out about his epic skill from the department. Unlike Timothy, Lindsay wouldn't gain levels unless she faced difficult battles. It was for the sake of power and increasing her rank that she was willing to take such crazy risks. While Timothy thought it was all a bit unreasonable, Lindsay finally tipped the scales in her favor by saying she knew he would always protect her in case of danger. Timothy scratched the back of his head. He was too tired to argue, so he let the girl come with them. These ardent persuasions were finally interrupted by Abe, who asked if they were ready to go inside. Timothy decided there was no point in lingering any longer and ordered everyone to descend into the workshop. Sometime later, the group of adventurers reached the first floor of the old witch's workshop. Helen felt an overwhelming amount of magical energy in the dungeon. It was definitely no ordinary ruin. Which is why, before the source of magical energy appeared, they needed to pump Timothy to the maximum. If Timothy encountered an opponent with a level 300, he wouldn't be able to defeat him easily with his level 10. Abba reasoned that it would have been much easier to raise the guy's level on the way here, rather than inside, but because of the battle with the desert curse, all the local monsters had simply hidden in their lairs. Unexpectedly, the conversation was interrupted by the first monster, a level 50 iron warrior. Timothy looked at the strange creature, realizing that the local monsters were like this. This specimen would be good for his leveling. Abe decided they should weaken the warrior, and Timothy would deliver the final blow. While the guy was thinking about his tactics, the Iron Warrior rushed to attack and his friends barely managed to jump to a safe distance. Timothy remained at a distance, not joining the fight. He trusted his friend's plan. Abby told Timothy not to worry. They were some of the best adventurers in Durham and would not be trifled with. Helen began attacking the Iron Warrior at the same time as Abe, but was on the other side of him, saying that they would never allow the monster to harm Timothy. The girl attacked, tearing off one of his limbs. At that same second, Abe informed Timothy that his moment of glory had arrived. The guy did not waste time waiting to be invited a second time. He immediately ran to attack. Suddenly, when he was almost at his target, Timothy saw that the Iron Warrior had transformed, and the monster seemed ready to crush him. Lindsay, who had been watching the battle, realized that Timothy was in trouble. Not worried about her own safety, the girl decided she would certainly protect him with her epic lightning strike skill. A thunderbolt struck as Lindsay rushed past Timothy like lightning, knocking him down, running straight for the Iron Warrior. When the boy saw it was Lindsay, he began to worry about her, but the girl was very brave, though still lacking strength. Her counterattack didn't last long as the monster was stronger than she was, which was expected. Lindsay was sent flying back. Timothy managed to catch her and prevent a painful fall, and he sincerely thanked her for saving his life at the last moment. The Iron Warrior, now deciding to transform again, caught Timothy off guard. He didn't expect it to turn into a mechanical witch doll. The Iron Warrior seemed to be waiting for these words from Timothy because as soon as the boy spoke, the warrior immediately attacked. Timothy dodged to avoid death and laughed at the warrior, mocking him for thinking he could hit him with such a giant head. However, his own attacks didn't cause any damage to the enemy at all. This was due to the difference in their levels. Timothy didn't know how to defeat the monster. Helen shouted that if it was just a mechanical doll, there must be a core under its body. Timothy asked how they should proceed to get to it. Abe replied that it was simple. They had to destroy the body of the Iron Warrior by force. Not expecting support, Timothy shouted at the magic robot to attack him. The Iron Warrior turned in his direction, but was immediately shot in the other arm, which was blown apart. Meanwhile, Abe wasted no time jumping up to the warrior and tearing at the iron plating with his hands. He didn't need cover because he wasn't as weak as he seemed. In a moment, the guy exposed the warrior's core. Turning to his friends, Abe said that while the Iron Warrior was disoriented, they should attack it. Timothy immediately ran at the enemy, clutching his sword. This time, he had to do everything to win. A few seconds later, he struck the core of the Iron Warrior, and it shattered into pieces. A second later, the Iron Warrior fell to the ground and turned into a pile of scrap metal. Timothy finally got what he wanted, 50 levels from the defeated monster. If the boy defeated a couple more mechanical dolls in the same way, he would quickly be able to regain his previous level. Helen said that the most important thing was to remember that these were just magical golems. Their weak point was their magical core. Ebby added that it was thanks to this core that they could function on their own. They were mindless puppets that obeyed the will of their master, who breathed life into them with the help of magic. This enemy was very simple. The friends were so busy talking again that they didn't notice that 2 more Iron Warriors had approached them. As Lindsay had informed them, the enemies were also level 50. Now, with Timothy's level at 60, he could handle them alone. The guy desperately ran toward the enemies, pulling his sword out of its sheath. Once again, on his way to the Iron Warriors, Timothy swung his fist and hit the first one, causing it to fall onto the second. At the first blow of the boy's hand, the magical robot's core immediately opened. Timothy pulled out one of his daggers and quickly devoured the enemy's level. Timothy's level was now 110, and the second Iron Warrior was no problem for him at all. Timothy activated the wings of Seraphim. He realized that the enemy was transforming, but this trick would not work on him. The second time, the guy had 2 swords in his hands at once. The Iron Warrior was a bit confused, and with a lightning leap, Timothy struck twice, chopping off both robot arms and piercing the magic core. The level of the enemies had been absorbed and the level of the owner was raised to the 160. The guy managed to improve his level a little, but a new danger was approaching. His friends, Helen, jumped in front of Timothy and created a protective dome. She shouted for her friends to be careful. It was too early to relax because a whole army of Iron Warriors was moving in on them. The robots had noticed the offenders and wanted to kill them. The friends urgently needed to find a way out of the situation because there were just too many enemies. Helen's protective dome protected the adventurers very well, but it did not keep them from being confused about their future actions. The girl realized that although the level of the magical robots was quite low due to the anomaly in this place, they were stronger than they should be. Meanwhile, the robots sent a request for reinforcements to immediately eliminate the threat. An army of iron puppets lined up in several rows, determined not to let their uninvited guests leave alive. Ebby, seeing that things were dire, shouted to his friends to run to the tunnels. None of the adventurers argued with him, and Timothy was the last one to leave the room. For a while, they ran without looking back, but the boy noticed that he didn't see Lindsay anywhere and looked. The girl stopped in the middle of the road in awe. The boy also saw the Iron Warriors approaching her and covered her with himself, ordering her to run immediately. Lindsay did not need much persuasion, constantly looking back at Timothy as she quickly ran after her friends. Meanwhile, the guy once again activated the Seraphim's wings skill and prepared for battle. The first Iron Warrior started shooting, and the guy first deflected its bullets with his swords. When the magical puppet lost patience, it began to pour iron on everything. Timothy accelerated his fencing skills to defend himself. The car, powered by a giant battery, did not retreat, and Timothy realized that it was time to do something drastic. When the shooting stopped, the guy shouted for the cans to come to him, as they would not be able to overwhelm him with their numbers anyway. Suddenly, the boy saw one of the Iron Warriors activate a large cannon from its body. It began to accumulate energy for a shot. In a moment, the energy of the shot, illuminating the entire tunnel, was already reaching out to Timothy. It was an unexpected twist, and the guy had to quickly run away from the flames of hell. Timothy managed to hide around the corner while the first of the Iron Warriors broke the granite slabs with its shot. The other activated their guns. The next collective shot destroyed the wall behind which Timothy was hiding, so he had to run away again with everything exploding behind him. Meanwhile, Abe, Helen, and Lindsay ran to another entrance to a room and stopped at the threshold. Timothy, who ran up to them a few minutes later, asked what they were doing there and why they needed to run as fast as possible. Robot shooters, who also had canned cans, were no longer an option, and they had to hurry. Abe replied that they would have loved to do so, but they simply had nowhere to run. The room was a dead end. When he went inside, the guy could not contain his cry of despair. He did not understand why they were so unlucky. The Iron Warriors were already behind them, and Helen managed to create a protective dome in time to prevent the bullets from hitting anyone in the squad. The friends gradually retreated from the entrance and finally found themselves in the center of the hall while the enemies began to enter and surround them from different sides. When the shooting started, Helen needed all her strength to hold back the gunfire that was pouring down on them. The girl held on with all her strength, but the pressure was too strong and the cans did not allow her to catch her breath. Helen began to feel that she was being pushed back, and something had to be done urgently. The girl shouted to her friends that she was no longer able to protect them and deter their enemies. Timothy immediately reacted and said that in that case she should let him go ahead. Bab objected and said that even if the boy had a high level, there were too many enemies and they were strengthened by a magical anomaly. He wouldn't be able to defeat them. Timothy knew his friend was right, but he just didn't know what they needed to do to survive. Suddenly, the gunshots stopped, and the friends found themselves in a kind of energy beam. They looked up at the mountain and saw the runes of some kind of spell, which were gradually activating. Helen was the only person who knew what was happening. It was teleportation. A few seconds later, the floor began to cave in under their feet, and they fell into the abyss. The friends found themselves in a dark abyss, and as they fell, Timothy reasoned that the floor could not have collapsed on its own. This situation had been set up by someone. In addition to falling, the guy heard the shouts of the Iron Warriors who said it was necessary to pursue the offenders. He had to defend himself in the air. The first Iron Warrior who encountered Timothy flew off against the wall and the tin can was defeated. Timothy looked up to see 3 more robot puppets pointing all their guns at him. Lasers shot directly at his squad. The guy realized that no one in his group would be able to dodge the enemy's attack in time, but at the same moment he heard Abe's voice. Abe wanted Timothy to give him his hand immediately, but he was at a good distance and no matter how hard he reached out, he couldn't reach the guy. After a moment, Abe looked back at Helen, who was even lower, and asked her to use wind magic and push him toward Timothy. Helen said that if Abe really wanted to, she would use wind magic, but he had asked for it and shouldn't blame her later. Like a feather, Abe flew at high speed in the direction of Timothy, who was already prepared to catch him. A moment later, there was a successful collision of sides, and Abe, without stopping his flight, spun Timothy around and threw him forward at the Steel Warriors. A few seconds later, the first of the Steel Warriors was cut in half by Seraphim's sword, while the other 2 remained far below. The cut metal can exploded in mid-air, creating a blast wave and fire that moved toward the other 2 robots. When the fight dissipated, Timothy saw that the 2 were still alive and even shooting in his direction. The guy tried his best to fight off the avalanche of bullets and struck back, and the tin cans were wounded. There was a powerful explosion that illuminated the entire tunnel through which the adventurers were traveling. As the guy flew past the fire, he was pierced by the absorbed levels of the 3 enemies he killed. His current level was now 360, and if he continued to increase his level, he would be able to defeat the one who had cursed Durham. Realizing that everyone was now looking at Timothy and not paying attention to anything else, Lindsay shouted that they are still falling. Helen looked at the girl and told her not to worry, they would get out of here. A few seconds later, all the members of Timothy's squad found themselves back in a hall they had never seen before, and the magic could have saved their lives. As soon as Helen, Lindsay, and Abe hit the floor, a powerful explosion sounded behind them, throwing them back into the air. When they looked back, they saw the silhouette of Timothy in the smoke. He apologized to his friends for being too high. The guy so far did not know how to control his strength to the fullest. Abe replied that nothing terrible had happened, at least for now, and he didn't have to worry about Timothy anymore. Meanwhile, Lindsay was looking around, wondering what kind of place this was. The room was dark, and she couldn't see anything. Helen activated her skill and lit all the candles in the round hall so the friends could finally see the environment in peace. As soon as the adventurer's feet hit the floor, the powerful witch woke up. She sensed the intruders on her territory. The woman's first inclination was to kill them, but she did not know how best to do so. Whichever way she chose, the witch could not allow the perpetrators to survive, and the woman gradually came out in front of the adventurers. Timothy could see some kind of mechanism under her clothes. Was this witch a mechanical doll too? He looked back at his friends and warned them to be careful, as they were facing a difficult doll. The witch activated the self-destruct protocol and turned on the catastrophe mode. After a moment, the witch straightened her shoulders and threw off the robe that hid her essence. Abe said that there was no doubt that it was the reason for the magical anomalies. After examining his opponent, the guy realized that this monster had too high a level. This broken wisdom was at level 400. 30 years ago, a witch was sitting on the bank of a river when suddenly she saw a wicker basket in the water and pulled it out. What she saw inside made the woman wonder if she, an old hermit witch, would be able to raise this child. After some thought, she realized that no, the woman had devoted her entire life to the search for truth and had already lived 80 years. During her lifetime, she managed to become a powerful witch who knew everything possible about magic, but did not learn to live like an ordinary person. Rejecting everything worldly, she began to follow only one path. Like an old fool, she couldn't understand why the child's parents left her alone. If she left the baby too, it might die because of hungry wild animals. Pausing, she said that this was probably the fate of this child, but in response she heard a please. She was touched by the fact that such a small child could say something, and it turned out that the child was polite. Yet, she could not imagine what a child would grow up to be if their mother was an old hermit witch. The baby's will to live was strong, and the woman decided to look after her, introducing herself to the child as Nellie. Taking the child in her arms, she named him Miriam, the name of a spell that makes a person absolutely happy. Meanwhile, a fight broke out in the dungeon hall. The witch shouted that the adventurers should die and rushed forward, but Timothy was able to jump away. The boy saw that the robot witch's hands were glowing in different colors, which meant that she would use different energy against them. To prevent the woman's first strike, Timothy decided to rush into the attack first, but he didn't even have time to approach the enemy because she sent pillars of flame at him. Up to the ceiling, the flames were followed by a swift stream of wind, and Timothy tried to dodge the blow, but the witch was relentless, attacking wave after wave, hoping that one of the blows would hit its target. In addition, the monstrous creature activated the power in its other hand, so now 3 elements were opposing the adventurers. Jumping into the air, the witch launched about 100 daggers at her friends. At the same time, Helen stepped forward and formed a protective dome over the adventurers, hoping that this would delay the attack while her friends were trying to cope with the previous one. A toothy monster, formed from her hand, also rushed to the ground. This giant toothy snake destroyed the protective dome that Helen was building, and the friends had to duck to the ground. The witch was just waiting for this and, at the same moment, rushed at the adventurers with a giant sword. Timothy turned to Ab and said that they needed to cut off the witch's hands so that she would not be able to do magic. But in a second, the guys were forced to defend themselves against the attack of a giant monster. The witch shouted that they would die, but then asked why they should be killed, and Timothy did not understand why these questions were asked, because she was the one who attacked first. The girls who were kneeling in fear a little further away from the boys also could not understand what was wrong with this woman. Not only did she have an abnormally high level, but the witch could also use various types of magic, something Helen had never seen before. A had a thought about this and was quick to share it with his friends. 10 years ago, a powerful witch lived in this workshop, and she knew how to use various types of magic, Eb said. Eb said, I knew the woman was long dead, but what if she had found a way to live in these ruins forever? Timothy shouted that if this theory was correct, it might turn out that they were not looking at a doll at all. It could have been the soul of an old witch imprisoned in a new mechanical body. In the process of thinking, the boys managed to deal a significant blow to the witch, and she flew away for some distance, landing opposite Timothy and Abe at the other end of the hall. The mechanical monstrosity prepared for a new fight. Timothy asked his friend if the old witch had always been so inhospitable, and he replied that the old men from the city of Durham said that although the woman was a hermit, she never harmed anyone. Now, the witch looked like a completely insane creature, ready to kill all living things that came before her. They were looking at the witch's snags, who could not find a place for herself, and she shouted to the whole hall that the uninvited guests must die. Ebba said that it seemed the soul of the old witch in question was trying to fight the body of the mechanical doll. In any case, it was now absolutely impossible to know who the enemy was. Suddenly, dozens of giant mirrors began to form under the ceiling of the room they were in. The witch made an energy shot upwards, and the beam began to ricochet off each mirror. The mechanical doll was very dangerous. 18 years ago, in the old witch's workshop, a little girl was trying to assemble her first robot. The witch was unhappy that the child was fiddling with these dolls again. Apparently, the girl was attracted to strange things. Maren replied that she did not have the same strength as the master, but she wanted to achieve her mastery. The witch replied that she certainly understood that the girl could not match her, but if she continued to study hard, she would gain the same power. The girl believed that she had no talent for magic, which is why she decided to become an inventor. Maren dreamed that one day her dolls would definitely be able to defeat the witch master. The witch said that the girl could do as she pleased because it was only her life and she was able to live it as she wished. 8 years later, the girl was standing by the bed where her master, the witch, said goodbye to her life. The woman asked her not to scream in vain. Very soon, her life would come to an end. That's all. Maren shouted that she could not die so soon. She had not yet created a creation that could match the master in power. She added that she was just a little bit away from creating her most important masterpiece. She begged her not to leave her halfway through, large abundant tears rolling down her eyes, but the girl did not pay any attention to it. The witch asked her not to cry and assured her that Maren would finish her work because she had devoted her entire life to studying dolls. Even though she died, the girl's life was just beginning, and she hoped that she would have a wonderful future because she was a good girl. The witch turned her belly up and began to attack the boys again. She quickly ran right at them, turning at the last second. She found herself face to face across from Lindsay. Timothy, seeing this, called out to the girl in warning, but it was too late. One of the witch's arms flew up, generating another stream of energy to attack. Timothy had never run so fast in his life, and the entire impact of the doll fell on the boy, who covered the girl with his body. Without letting go of Lindsay, he flew away from the witch, breaking the magic mirrors. When the movement stopped, Timothy was left lying on the floor, unable to move. Pain. When Helen and Abe saw this, they became very excited and the girl immediately rushed to help. Despite the fact that the boy stopped her, Helen quickly ran up to one of the magic mirrors and pierced it with her hand. At the same second, the girl's body flew into the air and was carried away from the epicenter of the fight by a blast wave. Abe watched with indescribable horror as Helen flew unconscious across the room, losing her hat. While he was distracted, the witch took advantage of this and approached the boy about to attack. What happened next was like ping pong, only he was the ball and the witch was running around the room, knocking the wind out of him. The boy felt firsthand how fast this witch was. Her hands never stopped for a sec. When Abe saw the doll attacking again, he wondered how much longer he could dodge the blows. The witch immediately hit the guy with a powerful energy beam that knocked him down. Abe flew across the room and crashed into a bookshelf, causing a powerful explosion. Timothy looked at this picture from a distance, thinking that if things continued like this, they would all be killed here. At this rate, something had to be done urgently, and Timothy had no choice but to activate his skills again. As soon as the boy did, the witch immediately felt the change and, looking back, flew in his direction, attacking him. During the fierce fight, Timothy realized that he had managed to wound her, and this motivated him greatly. But it turned out to be completely in vain, because the attack did not seem to have any effect on the witch. Instead, the witch became even more enraged and attacked the boy with renewed vigor, which left Timothy unable to stand, falling to the ground. The boy tried to understand what this old doll was up to. He saw the witch standing in front of him in the center of a solid pillar of fire. Timothy realized that it seemed nothing could stop this witch. No matter what was happening to her body, it would not stop her from fighting. Timothy decided that he shouldn't prolong the fight because he simply couldn't withstand the pressure. This powerful witch was, after all, an ordinary mechanical doll and therefore must be powered by a magic core. The only problem was getting to this magical core and staying alive. Screaming about death, the witch attacked the boy and he began to dodge the swift attacks at top speed. Timothy realized that if he kept going, he would be able to get close to her. But the second he saw the Iron Warriors, a squad of 4 robotic puppets landed on the floor and immediately found their target in the boy's face. Timothy was excited. These cans had never been so useful and he would be able to improve his level. The boy killed all 4 Iron Warriors, one by one, and the witch did not interfere in this fight. The system announced that the levels were absorbed and the current level of the owner reached 560. The guy told the armor that he needed a legendary skill that would limit the enemy's movement. The request was received, and the search was started. Sometime later, the system reported that it recommended purchasing the Royal Command skill. The skill bound a target with a lower level than the owner, with countless black spears and cost 150 levels. The guy requested the legendary skill King's Order and prepared for the test. It was wonderful that the monster was at level 400 and Timothy was at level 410. The guy shouted that the witch should kneel before the royal majesty and activated the royal command skill. At the same moment, the witch, who was running towards the boy with all her might, was pinned down by a large number of spears, unable to move. 10 years ago, Marin, proud of herself, rolled something bulky into the bookstore, and she succeeded. Although she tried to transplant the soul of the Witchmaster into the doll, she failed. The man told her about a forbidden technique that would help her bring the master back to life. If you put the soul of a Witchmaster into a doll, the woman will live as long as Marin is alive. Although she would never be able to be with her mentor again, she considered it a small price to pay for her life. The doll will have to turn on automatically, and the master's soul will remain inside forever. As soon as the girl left the room, looking back to say goodbye, Maram lingered. Although she was consumed by evil, the girl hoped that the witch in the doll's body would live a happy life for both of them. Now this half-crazed witch doll was pinned down by the spears that were formed with Timothy's skill, and she was resisting. The floundering continued for several minutes, and finally, the doll broke free of its captivity and started running in the boy's direction again. Timothy was amazed that his plan didn't work, but he decided to keep going. Timothy pointed his hand toward the doll and activated his royal command skill once more. Dozens of spears again caught the witch, piercing her limbs. The crazy creature wanted Timothy to die. She had to kill the intruder, but she didn't remember why. The boy took up his sword. He did not understand why the witch was still asking this question. She said that killing people was her goal and then denied it herself. A crazy, powerful witch doll escaped from the spear's captivity again, tearing off part of her limbs. She rushed toward Timothy, but he activated his skill again. The royal command skill was used for the third time, and Timothy stopped her with his spear. The witch screamed in pain. Timothy, seizing the moment, began to strike the creature blow after blow, while she repeatedly said that her desire was to protect her child. Unable to withstand such torture, the witch finally fell to her knees, unable to resist any longer. A moment later, Timothy was standing in front of the wreckage of the former doll of the powerful witch. The guy couldn't even realize at first whether he had defeated her until he saw the blue light that came out of the wreckage. It was the soul of a powerful witch, and it was trying to get to some door that appeared behind a bookcase that had moved aside. Timothy was surprised to see a secret door, and he immediately had a desire to explore what was behind it. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by the system's voice announcing the level's absorption. A powerful energy beam burst from the doll's remains. Timothy was overjoyed. It was the first time he had defeated such a high-level opponent, and it was supposed to raise his level to the heavens. The system did indeed announce a few seconds later that the current level of the owner had already reached 810. At the very moment the announcement ended, Timothy was surrounded by darkness, which was so heavy that he fell to the floor. It was incredibly painful for the guy. But was it because the armor absorbed such a high level? The dark energy was increasing, and the system issued a warning. It informed him that due to the absorption of a huge number of levels, the owner would suffer enormous physical and mental damage, and this process had already begun. To save the owner's life, the system recommended acquiring the vault skill. The system waited for confirmation of this action, but Timothy did not hear it. The system eventually made a second request, but did not wait for a response. At this time, Timothy turned into a complete pain. Realizing that the boy could not give orders, the armor took over temporary authority and acquired and activated the vault skill on its own. When the vault was activated, the system notified that 400 levels of the owner had been transferred to it, and the darkness was gradually replaced by light. Soon the light dissipated and Timothy began to sink to the floor. The guy would have remained unconscious, but he groaned in pain. Only when he fell to the ground did Timothy's whole body tremble. A few minutes later, the guy raised his head and asked the armor of the abyss if they had really saved his life. The system responded that it simply confirmed the owner's intention and acquired a new armor function, storage. Timothy admitted that it was a complete surprise for him because, to be honest, he didn't remember much due to the enormous pain. The guy asked what kind of capabilities this storage facility had. The system replied that the storage skill allows you to add or remove your levels at the owner's discretion. Previously, the ruler had the 10th level, but the system took over and took away 400 levels. Finally, Timothy understood everything, which is why his level did not increase. All thanks to the storage skill. Timothy realized that this was quite convenient. As soon as he got to the city, he could lower his level to avoid attracting too much attention. Yet Timothy must not absorb too high levels, otherwise he would simply lose his mind. The system said that it was the first time he had absorbed such a high level and it would not happen again. Timothy replied that he would deal with the storage. He heard his friends running toward him. Babe, Lindsay and Helen were very worried. They started asking if he was okay because they had heard Timothy screaming. The guy said not to worry. Everything was fine now. The most important thing for him was that they remained safe and sound. The friends smiled at each other and clashed fists, and the mission was accomplished. Suddenly, Timothy remembered that after he overcame the old doll, a ball of light flew out of its body. Abe wondered if it could be the soul of an old witch, and the boy asked what happened next. Timothy replied that this so-called soul of the old witch had opened a secret door behind the bookcase. Lindsay looked at this door with admiration. She asked if they would go there. Helen replied that of course, but if the old witch's soul was still there behind this door, their band of adventurers might be in serious danger. A group of friends led by Timothy began to approach the mysterious door. Taking hold of the handle, Timothy announced that he would open the door in the next second, and everyone had to get ready. Amazed, the friends saw an incredibly beautiful lawn with a neat little house in the middle of it. Timothy didn't understand what kind of place it was because they were deep underground, and here was some kind of Eden. Eb replied that it seemed this space was created with the help of an old witch's magic. Helen was also amazed. She had never seen anything like it in her life. The old witch was actually a powerful sorcerer. Lindsay, alone, was turning her head, trying to find the place where the ball of light Timothy had mentioned had gone. The only place to hide was that house in front of them. Suddenly, something very fast rushed outside through the roof of the house, breaking it. 2 seconds later, a robot with a sword for a hand landed on the ground right in front of them. Timothy got ready. He believed he had a new opponent. But the robot told the guy to immediately put away his weapon. Showing his sword instead of a hand, the robot said that it was not a toy at all, and it was better not to swing it. Timothy noticed that the robot also had a sword and walked around with it, but the robot replied that it would lose part of its arm if it could. In the end, the newcomer threw the jokes aside and said that she actually had to thank them. The robot called itself Nellie and, officially on behalf of the old witch who had settled in these ruins, thanked him once again for saving her soul. She added that she never would have thought that a witch like her would be able to live so long. The witch said that the terrible mechanical doll which her friends had defeated had held her soul for many years. As soon as the boy and his team destroyed the doll, she woke up in this new body and finally her will was no longer being oppressed. Abe admitted that he had suspected something like that. The witch's mind had been clouded by negative energy. Lindsay asked why the witch's soul had not found peace. The witch replied that after the destruction of her old body, her soul found refuge in the old doll. Logically, she should have found peace and finally left this world. But an immature boy had used a forbidden magic technique on her. Helen, disbelieving, asked what kind of forbidden magic technique they were talking about. Timothy was also curious to find out what the powerful witch meant, and it was more pleasant to talk to her now than the previous time. The witch replied that it was from a list of spells that had been rejected by the wise men and were forbidden to be used by anyone in the wizarding community. The use of these techniques is a real taboo because of their dangerous consequences. Timothy asked what the unknown boy had done to her soul. The witch replied that forbidden technique number 95 had been used on her, a soul seeking rest in another's body. Because of this technique, no matter what efforts the adventurers made to destroy her body, her soul would always find another shell to continue its existence. Helen, after hearing the witch's story, said that if she wanted to die, they could always cast a spell on her, but the witch said that was impossible. Her soul could only be freed by the one who had placed the forbidden technique on her. Helen wondered if even a powerful witch like her could not free herself from the technique, but the sad truth was that she couldn't. The witch replied that the person who had cast the spell on her knew she would try to free herself and did everything to ensure that no one but him could do it. Helen did not back down. She was curious to know who had used such a powerful forbidden technique against the powerful witch. The robot witch, placing her hand over her face, said that the person was her student. Meroman could not accept her death and decided to take this desperate step. That's why she used the forbidden technique. No one dares disturb the natural course of things. The dead cannot be brought back to life. The witch thought this act was surprisingly foolish. She wanted the girl to live her life in happiness, but Meron chose a different path. In any case, she wanted to deal with this girl herself and teach her a lesson in her new body. For now, however, the problem was different. Timothy asked what exactly the woman meant. Miriam was not smart enough to master such a complex magic technique, and the witch had never taught her such things. The girl had made a deal with a wizard who helped imprison her soul. Miriam enslaved her and forced her to create the strongest war dolls for him. As far as she remembered, the sorcerer's name was Damon Foun. As soon as the name was spoken, a stranger teleported to the clearing. Damon said that the Wizard's Lodge expels strong magicians who use such techniques, but he thought it was nonsense. The forbidden techniques, he claimed, are wonderful. They have helped many people live happily. In the hands of such magicians lies the power of God himself. Damon waved his staff and looked haughtily at everyone present. He said that this is why he teaches forbidden magical techniques to anyone who needs them. The powerful witch rushed at the sorcerer, trying to shut him up. She said that Damon was a very power-hungry person. He broke into her monastery, took everything from her, her student, and her soul. She would make him go through the same hell. Turning to the mechanical dolls, the witch ordered them to kill the intruder, Damon Foun. But her spell was powerless against the sorcerer. With a single wave of his staff, the boy bound all the metal constructs that had appeared on the lawn. Seeing the reaction of the others, Damon began to boast even more about his strength, laughing out loud. In a moment, all the iron warriors were scattered into pieces around him. The boy looked at his friends and the robot witch, then said that the jokes were over for now. Closing his eyes and smiling, Damon Foun turned to the witch, Nellie, and asked for permission to kill her. The powerful witch, Nellie, asked if Damon had really decided to kill her, and whether he realized it was impossible to do so because of the forbidden magic. Damon laughed, and he said that of course he knew. That was exactly why he helped Maram put the spell on her. The robot witch lit up everything with lightning and anger. Only a spellcaster could remove the forbidden equipment from the victim. Simply put, the only person who could kill her was Damon. The sorcerer laughed out loud. He was enjoying this moment. The witch was right. Only he could free her soul from this tin can. The boy was torn apart by the realization of his greatness and cunning. It was he who had shown the witch all the charm of the forbidden technique. Damon pointed his staff at the witch. He was going to destroy the body of her mechanical doll. As soon as he did, the soul of the powerful witch Nellie would leave this world forever. Nellie couldn't understand why he would do this. He could have broken into her home at any time. Why come now? Damon replied that it was indeed a good question. In fact, he didn't want to kill her originally, but the situation had changed over the last 10 years. Right now, he was on the verge of fulfilling his cherished dream. To get the desired result, Damon needed to make a very big sacrifice, and that sacrifice was to be the entire southern capital of Durham. Damon stuck out his long tongue, laughing. He could already imagine all the buildings, each filled with people, becoming the foundation of his goal. He said that people still remembered Nellie, and only a powerful witch like her could stop him. He didn't want people who remembered her kindness to come begging her for help. It would be easier to just kill her. Timothy, just in case, asked if Damon had really sent those monsters to the city. The man answered in the affirmative. At that very second, Timothy activated his powers, saying that he had finally found the bastard. He rushed to attack. Damon met the boy's blow with a smile and blocked it with his staff. Timothy's pressure was intense, forcing Damon to jump to a safe distance. Timothy said he didn't know all the reasons behind Damon's actions, but he didn't care. He would not allow Durham to be destroyed for selfish reasons. The boy declared that he would personally kill the arrogant sorcerer and promised to do so. Timothy was at level 410, while Damon was at level 500. Damon was curious how the boy planned to do it. Until now, he believed that only Nellie could stop him, but he hadn't seen adventurers of such a high level in these parts for a long time. Timothy rushed in for another attack, but Damon said that killing the boy wasn't part of his plans. Still, he considered it a stroke of great luck that this particular boy had shown up. Now he had the chance to deal with the two elements that irritated him the most. He struck his first blow. It was so powerful that Timothy lost his balance, flew backwards, and fell helplessly onto the lawn. Damon looked at the boy who was trying to relieve the pain in his chest and said he should be happy. He would give him a quick death. Suddenly, Helen and Abe appeared behind Damon. When the boy looked up in surprise, Abe said he shouldn't forget about them. Looking at his friends, Damon admitted that he wasn't ready to fight so many enemies. Summoning a teleporter, he said goodbye to everyone. Nellie ran up to him and asked if he was running away. Damon replied that he wasn't running from her. He simply didn't want to be late for the bloody feast. The sorcerer stepped into the teleporter. Looking back at Timothy's squad, Damon said that if they truly wanted to defend the city, they'd better hurry. The teleporter vanished, but the group could still hear his voice. At that very moment, Damon's subordinates had already begun killing the people of Durham. Meanwhile, Durham was as crowded as ever. The city bustled with life. Damon watched the residents from the highest point in the city, knowing everything would change soon. This idyllic world would end today. The process had already begun. The bloody feast had started, and Damon had helpers, the first of whom had just teleported into the city. The appearance of the first subordinate made the sorcerer laugh sinisterly. He enjoyed doing what others didn't dare. The city was soon flooded with Damon's teleporting subordinates. The sorcerer wished death upon all its inhabitants, eager for them to become food for the new god of this world. At the moment the senseless bloodshed began in Durham, the magical core inside Witch Nellie cracked. Feeling changes within her, the robot witch dropped to one knee. Timothy rushed over and asked what was wrong. The witch replied that they needn't worry. It seemed Damon had modified the forbidden magic technique before leaving. Timothy tried to continue her thought, which meant that in the event her body broke down, Nellie finished his sentence. Yes, if her body was damaged, she would simply die in this world forever. But honestly, she didn't care. She had already died once. Death no longer scared her. What did scare her was that doll. When she had been imprisoned in that terrible doll, she couldn't leave the confines of her studio, and her mind was clouded. Now everything was different. She was free and could finally leave this place. This new body wasn't subject to the old restrictions. What Damon said had been important, and the woman drew her. The friends turned their attention to these words, asking if they remembered them. Lindsay said that this sorcerer was going to kill all the inhabitants of Durham to achieve his dream. Timothy asked the witch if it was true, and the woman replied that she didn't think Damon was lying at all. Batabi said that they had better get back to Durham as soon as possible and stop Damon from harming the townspeople. Helen replied that they would not be able to reach the city in time on their own. Timothy agreed. Even if they tried, by the time they reached Durham, it would be in ruins. The witch Nellie said that the boys and girls had probably forgotten who they had met today. Even Damon was afraid of her, as she was the only equal opponent he had. She asked them to leave the way to her, the powerful old witch. Meanwhile, a bloody harvest had begun in Durham, with Damon's henchmen executing people right on the streets. Another victim was a local man who begged for help, but Damon's subordinates were not impressed. Looking at the sorcerer standing over him, the man pleaded with them, swearing he would do anything to survive. Melissa was in Timothy's guild building at the time. She heard the man's terrible dying cry and looked out the window. She left her work and went out into the yard, surprised to see that the sky over Durham had turned purple. One of Damon's henchmen, who was on the other side of the street, saw a new victim. The sorcerer said that she should cry and beg, tremble with fear in anticipation of the inevitable. The girl's suffering was to become food for their new god. The sorcerer sent a deadly energy beam toward Melissa. At the last second, Timothy managed to rush in front of the girl and eliminate the attacker. He struck the enemy with a blow so powerful that the sorcerer was thrown against a building across the street. Looking at Melissa, Timothy told her not to worry. All the people of Durham were safe now. Helen appeared a moment later and said that those who use forbidden techniques are real weaklings, people who had never been able to master the magical arts in their entire miserable lives. Melissa looked at her friends around her and sincerely thanked them for saving her, saying they had arrived just in time. Nellie, the robot witch, said that Damon had managed to change the nature of her body. She was standing in a teleporter that no longer worked and now couldn't get back to her workshop, while her friends risked their lives to save others. Timothy thanked the powerful robot witch for teleporting them in time. The witch told the boy to stop calling her that, as it was a relic of the past. In response to her friend's silent questions, the witch said that she didn't even mind if they called her their friend. Several of Damon's henchmen had already received their punishment for killing innocents. Lyall said that doing such things was a great sin and that he would punish everyone responsible. The head of the Salvation Sword Guild told the rescued man to run to the headquarters where all the survivors were hiding and promised to protect them. The man obediently did what Lyall said. He also noted that the enemies he had encountered were approximately between level 80 and 100. Until now, Lyall had never met anyone in Durham who looked like them. Suddenly, the man heard clapping hands behind him, and a stranger's voice said he was a good warrior, the head of the Sword of Salvation Guild. Lyall turned around and looked at the stranger, asking if he was the one responsible for the chaos happening in the city. Damon laughed. He said that human anger, in his opinion, was very beautiful. At that moment, Lyall looked irresistible in his eyes. When asked directly, Damon answered in the affirmative, admitting that he had organized the bloody celebration spreading through the city. The head of the Sword of Salvation Guild looked at him carefully and asked what kind of bloody celebration he was talking about. Damon replied that only humans can experience this sweet cocktail of sensations. People can cry out from suffering, anger, or incredible rage, and these feelings make the blood boil in their veins. These angry feelings would be useful to the new god whom Damon wanted to awaken. This, Damon explained, was exactly what he meant when he called everything happening in Durham a bloody celebration. After listening to the narcissistic boy, Lyall asked if he had sent the desert-cursed creatures to Durham. Damon pretended to remember, but eventually admitted that he had summoned a couple of bugs to test the strength of her guild. The results did not impress him. The impudent sorcerer smiled ominously and admitted that he had to thank them because they defended the city that day. Now he could make all the locals pray to the new god. It was only through the protection of the Sword of Salvation Guild that the new god of this world would be able to enjoy human suffering to the fullest. Lyall thoughtfully concluded that it was Damon's fault and told him that he would not allow his dirty plan to come to fruition. The head of the Sword of Salvation Guild activated the legendary skill Demonic Coming. Damon said that even after using the legendary skill, the enemy's level only reached 400. The arrogant, irrepressible bastard laughed in Lyall's face, saying that he was no match for him. Damon was level 500. Lyall didn't care what the enemy said. He repeated that he would make them lay down their arms, no matter what level they had. Within 15 seconds, Timothy, watching the scene from a distance, informed the system that he wanted to activate the vault and add another 190 levels to his status. The system informed him that he was currently at level 600, but Lyall had already charged forward to attack Damon. Timothy silently attacked Damon from the other side, but the latter noticed him in time. Abe was destroying his share of the enemies when he suddenly realized that they were feeding on anger. Damon's henchmen forced innocent people to suffer and begged for mercy. All this bloodshed and massive sacrifice was only for the sake of feeding their god. According to Ebb, such actions and behavior were utterly disgusting. The warrior fighting beside Ebb said that if it pissed him off so much, he shouldn't just stand there like a pillar. If someone pisses you off, he said, you just need to punch them in the face. Who would doubt that Will gave this advice? In the end, both adventurers found themselves back to back, surrounded by enemies. When the fight started, Abe agreed with Will, who asked where the kid in black armor was. Abe replied that, right now, the boy, like everyone else, was fighting the evil that had come to Durham on his own. Just as Abe said, Timothy fought. He fought against Damon, who hadn't expected him to show up at all. When Timothy attacked the sorcerer a second time, he called for help from Lyall, who was still on the other side of the enemy. Lyall activated the demonic black flash skill, almost landing a hit on Damon with his sword. Realizing things were about to get ugly, the sorcerer used forbidden technique number 74, sacrifice for the common good. A second later, Damon was surrounded by his henchmen, both living and dead. The sorcerer said that they would protect him by risking their lives. He looked at some of them and added that he would certainly be very sad if the enemy killed them all, but he didn't need followers who couldn't handle loud adventurers. The sorcerer was most interested in how Timothy had raised his level so quickly, which in his opinion was abnormal. Still, he probably should have killed the guy in the workshop when he had the chance. Lyall, realizing that Damon was distracted by talking to the boy, decided to attack him, but all his attempts were in vain. After a series of attacks, the guild leader realized that Damon's forbidden technique was undoubtedly strong. However, it seemed that the technique consumed a lot of the sorcerer's energy, and that's why he couldn't use it constantly. Timothy, hearing the words of the head of the Sword of Salvation Guild, rushed to attack Damon. He believed that if this was true, then they both had to get rid of the sorcerer before he could activate his forbidden technique again. At the last moment, Damon managed to leap to a safe distance before Timothy could strike the spot where he had been standing. Timothy shouted that they should hit together and then the guy would definitely not be able to dodge. Lyall called it a good idea. The sorcerer looked around and saw two enemies flying at him simultaneously. Lyall and Timothy both activated the demonic black flash skill. Dark energy enveloped both adventurers, and the sorcerer realized he had been caught off guard. At the last second, he managed to activate a protective shield, relying entirely on its strength. In this battle, the persistence of the adventurers and the self-confidence of the sorcerer clashed, and in the end, persistence won out. The protective shield crumbled. A second later, the head of the Sword of Salvation Guild and Timothy surrounded Damon on both sides. The sorcerer was no longer able to resist. His clothes were completely bloody. Damon said that the taste of blood was still beautiful. Lyall and Timothy put a sword to Damon's head and told him he had lost. The adventurers added that, as long as they both stood guard, the boy would not be allowed to destroy Durham under any circumstances. Damon's reaction was incomprehensible. The sorcerer covered his face with his hand and laughed sarcastically, looking at his opponents. He finally admitted that he had indeed underestimated them. He was especially regretful for underestimating Timothy's strength and power, and for not taking advantage of his advantage earlier. The street where the fight had taken place was completely empty, with damaged buildings and the echoes of the sorcerer's confession of defeat bouncing off the walls. The sorcerer began to cry out that he hadn't offered enough sacrifices to awaken the new god, but it was far from over. A second later, servants appeared between him and the adventurers. Damon said that the new god didn't care who was sacrificed for him. With the last of his strength, the sorcerer bent backward and activated Forbidden Technique number 76, the death cry of the crowd. He used it against his own men. Finally, Damon said that they should taste the divine flavor of their own blood. The sorcerer's henchmen screamed in incredible pain, burning as if on fire. Eventually erupted. The guy magically pulled a dagger out of each of his followers and stabbed them. Lyall and Timothy didn't know how to react to this. The man was bleeding all over himself, and it was the blood of his own people. Damon said that his followers should not worry. Their sacrifice would not be in vain. Although this was still not enough, the sorcerer was unlikely to find new victims. Timothy couldn't stand it anymore. He rushed at the sorcerer, shouting that he would not allow him to do whatever he wanted. Damon got to his feet and said that the boy was really fast, but it was already too late for him. From that moment on, Timothy responded to any attack with laughter, not even intending to engage in a proper fight. The demon was in anticipation of something extremely beautiful for himself. He declared that the time had come. Lyall and Timothy must suffer and beg for mercy, merging into one for the sake of their new god. At that very second, blood began to rise into the sky from the bodies of murdered civilians across the city. All the blood flowed through the air toward Damon and his staff. The sorcerer said that God could taste his blood as well. If the new god needed Damon's flesh and blood, the sorcerer was ready to give him anything he wanted. Finally, the staff Damon was holding began to gradually open, revealing a red stone hidden within petals at its tip. The sorcerer was delighted, for here was the ripe fruit of suffering and human sorrow. The name of this stone was the blood crystal. Damon stuck his tongue out with a smile, raised his hand with the crystal, and shouted that no one in this city could stop him now. With this blood crystal, the sorcerer could now perform his ritual and fundamentally change the world's perception. Damon let out an ominous laugh, declaring that the world would finally meet its new god. Timothy was furious at his words and behavior. He demanded to know how the hell Damon planned to bring someone like that into the world. The sorcerer replied that the forbidden techniques were imperfect, and he wouldn't be able to fully resurrect the god. However, Damon wanted to let the new god take his body as a shell. The sorcerer said that very soon, the boy and everyone present would finally see the new god, but Timothy would have to wait a little longer. Then Damon teleported away in an unknown direction. A second later, Lyall, who was standing next to Timothy, said that the sorcerer wasn't going to perform the resurrection ceremony there, but he could guess where Damon went. Timothy asked hopefully if this was true. Lyall replied that there was a place west of Durham with an abnormally high concentration of dark magical energy. This anomalous location was called the Melon of the Palm Tree, and adventurers usually avoided it. Lyall said that he wanted to stop this dark sorcerer but had let him escape. Right now, they needed to assemble a squad of experienced and strong fighters to stop Damon. Unfortunately, there was no one in the Sword of Salvation Guild capable of resisting the sorcerer. Lyall knew that Damon's level was 500. The maximum level a person could normally reach was 250. The head of the Sword of Salvation Guild looked at Timothy and said that those rules did not apply to the boy. Timothy was the only one capable of defeating the sorcerer, and Lyall didn't know anyone else with the same level of skill. Lyall looked at Timothy carefully and asked if he was willing to accept a new assignment from him personally. He promised that if Timothy succeeded in this mission, he would allow the boys' guild to officially exist in Durham. Lyall also vowed to negotiate with the central administration to secure financial support for Timothy's guild. Timothy could also rely on Lyall personally as the head of the Sword of Salvation Guild, who swore to keep his promise. The man said that he would fight side by side with Timothy against the forces of evil and do everything in his power. However, Lyall emphasized that it was the boy who had to defeat Damon. After listening to Lyall's proposal, Timothy understood what was required of him and he agreed to the terms. Lyall folded his arms across his chest and asked what name Timothy had come up with for his guild. Timothy was stumped by the question. He hadn't thought about it until then. Lyall said it was important to choose a name for your creation. The man realized there was a delay and offered some advice. According to him, the name of a guild usually reflects the essence of its creator. In Lyall's opinion, Timothy had become a support for everyone he met during his adventures. Many people had been so inspired by Timothy's personality that they decided to follow his example, considering him their hero. He was also willing to sacrifice his life to save others, and his friends responded in kind. So Lyall proposed the name Black Star of Hope. Meanwhile, the city of Durham had gradually begun to recover from the horrors experienced by its residents. Outside the city, a girl was waiting for her boss with a flashlight in her hand. In front of her stood a new creature, something she had been working on for a long time, the most perfect being. The creature reported that a group of adventurers was on its way. The girl listened to the report and thanked him for the information. She thought, in this case, it was time to prepare for the newcomers. The girl knew she must not let them go further than this hall. Some time later, Damon joined the girl. Today was finally the day he had been waiting for, the day a new god would arrive on Earth. The sorcerer had carefully prepared for this moment. He had created a blood crystal and mastered a forbidden technique that would summon a new god into their world. But there was one caveat to his ideal plan. The sorcerer needed some time to perform the ritual. The girl replied that Damon didn't have to worry about that. She promised to personally kill anyone who dared to enter. The sorcerer responded that this was fine. He had not made a mistake when he made a deal with her. After discussing all the details, Damon said it was time to begin the ritual. The new god would radically change this world, a world that was already rotten. Meanwhile, several groups of adventurers carefully assembled by Lyall were traveling across the desert west of Durham in wagons. Among the many wagons was one in which all the members of the Black Star of Hope Guild were gathered. Lindsay suddenly said that she wondered where the boy had gotten the money for such a fancy cart and horses. Timothy replied that their application for a guild had been approved, and now the central government was supporting them financially. Ababe added that their guild was now called the Black Star of Hope, and Lindsay said the name sounded good. Timothy apologized for not being able to come up with anything better at the time, and Helen said they hadn't expected anything more. She added that, from now on, Timothy could officially be called a guildmaster. The guy looked back at his friends with a smile and after a short pause said, yes. As if said that Helen couldn't call him that. She was a member of the Sword of Salvation Guild. Helen shouted that she could if she wanted to. Their argument was interrupted by the carriage driver who called out to everyone to look ahead. The friends opened their mouths in shock. In front of them, they could clearly see the place where Damon was supposed to be, the palm tree melon. The witch Nellie said that the melon would probably be protected by a barrier, but she could teleport them there without much difficulty. Nellie was sure that their arrival had been anticipated, but her friends had no choice. Suddenly, Lindsay shouted that someone was ahead. The group looked forward and saw Damon's henchmen lined up in front of the carts. Timothy tensed. The appearance of the sorcerer's subordinates was no accident. The faceless henchmen simultaneously raised their hands and launched a spell at the newly arrived adventurers. One of the carts, hit by the energy flow, flew into the air and landed on its side, the wheels breaking off. Timothy shouted that there were adventurers from the Sword of Salvation Guild in that cart. He yelled that they needed to help their comrades in arms. But Abe stopped Timothy firmly. He told him not to rush into the fight before the allotted time. A second later, as members of the Sword of Salvation Guild flew out of the overturned cart, Abe said they would be fine on their own. Other units arrived at the entrance to the palm tree melon, and the adventurers began to approach the stairs. Lyall, along with his men, watched Timothy and his squad approach. The man looked sternly at the boy and asked if everyone was ready for what awaited them. Timothy answered affirmatively. Lyall then announced the start of the operation to capture the criminal Damon. After the announcement, all the adventurers ran toward the mausoleum, hurrying as they realized there was very little time left. When Timothy reached the first hall through the dark corridors, he stopped, stunned. He hadn't expected the building to look like this. The palm tree melon was spacious and well lit inside, with stained glass windows set into the openings. Lyall told the boy not to let his guard down. The enemy could attack at any moment. A second later, one of Damon's henchmen, armed with daggers, ran out from a side passage toward the boy. Timothy managed to dodge the first attack. The cloaked sorcerer soldier was followed by others, who quickly surrounded the adventurers. Lyall shouted that everyone should listen to him. The first squad of the Sword of Salvation would stay in this hall and fight the enemies. The second would move forward. When Lyall approached Timothy, he said that this information also applied to him. Lyall added that it was an order they had to catch Damon and there was no time for arguments. Other related goals and problems could be handled by members of his guild. A second later, the comrades were already running deeper into the melon, ready to attack again at any moment. Abe said they needed to hurry. If Damon was telling the truth, he was summoning an evil god into their world right now. The adventurers had no time to deal with the sorcerer's henchmen. Abe believed that when the time came, Timothy would have to face Damon himself. Without objecting, Timothy asked Abe if he really thought he couldn't handle a bunch of sorcerers. Timothy replied that Timothy misunderstood him. He hadn't said that. That's where the guys finally agreed. Abram said that he counted on Timothy as his guild master. A second later, the adventurers saw 4 more of Damon's minions advancing toward them. Lindsay looked back and shouted that there were enemies behind her too, and that there was no end to them. Without looking back or stopping his run, Lyall shouted that he was leaving these candidates for death to the mercy of will. The adventurer was even happy about this decision. Seeing a delay among the enemies, he said they would not overcome him, even with their numbers. A few of Damon's henchmen dared to confront Timothy, who was charging at them like a speeding train. Timothy scattered his opponents like bowling pins. The system informed him that the level of the henchmen was impossible to absorb, all because of the dark magic the sorcerer had cast on them. Timothy shouted that it didn't matter, his level was enough to overcome Damon. Looking back, the boy shouted to Lyall that the path was clear. The head of the Sword of Salvation Guild rushed forward, but at that same moment the wall next to him shattered. The man saw the claws of a monster before him. Lyall stopped. The desert-cursed man was staring at him. The man said that they hadn't seen each other in a long time. After examining the size of the monster, the head of the Sword of Salvation Guild remarked that he had previously encountered smaller counterparts of this beast. A moment later, more monsters broke through the wall in several nearby spots and stepped into the light. It turned out there were many of them. Looking back, Timothy saw that Lyall was surrounded by freaks. He was about to run back and help, but Lyall shouted that there was no time for that. He promised to hold the freaks off. The fate of the world now rested on Timothy's guild. The friends hurried to the main hall. In the next room, Helen felt as if the air was saturated with dark magic, making it difficult to breathe with each passing second. The witch Nellie replied that it wasn't surprising at all. The group then saw a door opposite them. It probably led directly to Damon. Timothy rushed across the hall, shouting to his friends that they had to hurry. Suddenly, a giant blue monster resembling a dog jumped out in front of them, blocking the passage. The girl quietly appeared next to the monster and told them that the wolf cub's name was Beish and she was Maram. Maram said that a new god would soon be born, and she gently stroked her wolf cub's face. After a short pause, she added that no one had invited adventurers to this celebration. At that moment, Beish opened his fiery mouth. Timothy realized this was the same Maram the powerful witch Nellie had told them about. He shouted that he didn't care who she was. He was ready to kill anyone who tried to stop him. Maram looked at Timothy defiantly and said he could try. The Iron Wolf Beish was level 450. She had heard that Timothy's level was abnormally high for an average person, and at present his level was 600. Maram said she was just an ordinary engineer, and in a fair fight she would never be able to defeat Timothy. That's why she had prepared something special for this occasion, just in time for his arrival. She stretched her hand forward and activated the protective field of her beast. Helen asked if it could be some kind of magical technique, but Abe was sure it wasn't. The guy didn't feel anything special. Timothy had a strong feeling that his body had suddenly become much heavier after these manipulations. Maram left her wolf cub in the middle of the hall and walked to a safe distance behind one of the columns, telling the monster that she was leaving the rest to him. She considered Beish her ideal creation and encouraged the wolf to show the uninvited guests how strong he was. As an android doll, the wolf rushed at Timothy, but the boy was ready and wasn't going to back down. He realized that even though his opponent's level was 150 lower than his own, Beish was not an opponent he could easily overcome. After repelling the wolf's first attack, Timothy decided to counterattack. He struck Beish with a series of quick, very painful blows with both swords at once. Despite this, the wolf didn't seem to be hurt at all. Though it must have been badly wounded, the robot attacked Timothy again. Beish flew around the hall like a madman, and Timothy couldn't catch him. Eventually, after getting enough distance for his next move, Beish opened his mouth and fired an energy beam in Timothy's direction. No matter how hard Timothy held his ground, a powerful explosion rang out in the hall. Lindsay screamed his name, terrified and worried about his fate. Had the rabid wolf hurt him? When the flames dissipated, his friends saw Timothy on the floor with a broken weapon in front of him. He said he had managed to block the blow just in time. What mattered to him now was why this had happened. He knew he had hit the wolf and wounded it. Given their level difference, Timothy was definitely supposed to win. But right now, the guy was looking at Beish, who didn't look like a... The wounded monster stood before Timothy, and he wondered why it was still alive. From afar, Maram asked if it wasn't strange that the boy was unable to defeat an opponent with a lower level. Smiling, the girl said the answer lay in Beish himself. She didn't call him her creation for nothing. Beish's skill reduced the levels of all his opponents within the radius of the energy field, and now Timothy's level was the same as the wolf's. The same applied to Beish's skeleton. It was made of strong steel that absorbed magical damage. The guy would likely run out of breath before overcoming this deadly machine. While the adventurer was stalled here, Damon would have enough time to finish his ritual. Hearing the daring words of the cunning girl, Timothy rushed at Beish with renewed vigor and powerful rage. The boy tried to reach the android wolf, but Beish deftly dodged his blows. Timothy knew Beish's level was 450 and he could use all his skills to defeat him. But in that case, he would lose all his precious time. That was exactly what Damon was counting on. As the boy was strategizing, Beish got closer and opened his mouth again, preparing to attack. Timothy rushed up to him, holding the wolf back with his swords. He didn't know what he should do. Unexpectedly, help came from a place he did not expect. The witch Nellie kicked the wolf in the face. The robot witch rapidly delivered blow after blow, effectively taking over the fight and leaving Timothy out of action. Looking back at the boy, Nellie said that she would deal with Beish and Maram herself. This caused great indignation in Maran, who heard their conversation perfectly. The witch said that the boy had more important things to do than babysit this unbearable child. Timothy looked at the witch's body. He didn't understand what was happening to her. The witch replied that it was all about the body she was in. It worked in the same way as the wolf's. Timothy, while fighting beside her, even felt an unusual surge of strength and energy within the energy field. Suddenly, the rest of his friends appeared behind him, led by Ab. Timothy looked at the guildmaster seriously and said briefly that it was time for him to go. He held his gaze on each of his friends and told them not to die while he was gone. Abby immediately laughed, pleased that the guildmaster was concerned about him. He watched Timothy run to the door of the main hall. In that moment, in his eyes, Timothy had truly become the leader. Maram also saw Timothy running toward the exit and ordered Beige to immediately chase after him. The wolf instantly turned around, abandoning the fight with the witch, and tried to catch up with Timothy. Halfway there, the boy accelerated with all his power and managed to break away from the chase slightly. Nellie was not satisfied with this development. Once again, she stood in Beige's way, demanding that he fight her on equal terms. In that tin can, the other adventurers were also on alert, ready to step in if the witch needed help. Maram remained focused on the scene and failed to notice what was happening around her. Abe took advantage of this. He appeared in front of her with lightning speed and drew his sword. The guy attacked Maram, but she managed to jump away at the last second. Abi said that Maram had created the perfect conditions to detain Timothy and prevent him from interfering with Damon, but the girl would have to forgive them. Their task now was to keep her here. Timothy ran to the main hall, relying entirely on his friends, though he was very worried about them. Beige fought fiercely with the witch Nellie, and they managed to exchange several powerful attacks. Suddenly, the wolf calmed down and Maram reappeared next to him. She said she couldn't understand who had created such an ugly doll. Maram noted that she had created flimsy dolls like this in her past life. The girl was burning with anger. The mere sight of her opponent irritated her. The robot witch Nellie replied that Maram was right. She had created this doll. Maram didn't understand what her opponent was saying. She herself could only create dolls like Nellie up to level 150, and they had no intelligence. Yet her opponent could talk and fight intelligently. Nellie said the girl was quite right, but added that if the soul of an old witch were to move into such a useless doll someday. After these words, Maram was speechless. Nellie explained that her soul was imprisoned in this world. Thanks to the forbidden arts, Marion stared at her opponent in shock. She could not believe she was seeing a master witch in this hall. Nellie said her level had increased the doll's powers many times over, and now it was level 450. Finally, the witch revealed that Maram had imprisoned her soul, and that the girl would now have to pay for it. The girl finally managed to stammer a few words and asked if she was really a master witch. Nellie told her that the reason she was in this room should be obvious. One stupid girl needed to be taught a lesson. Marin asked why Nellie was trying to teach her anything. The girl had just wanted to save the master, that was all. She wasn't a witch, so she had to make a deal with someone who could save Nellie from death. The witch replied that the girl had done all this was for her, and Nellie said she understood Maram's wishes, but when Maram was doing all this she did not take into account the witch's wishes, nor did she ask her consent. Death is the natural end of every living being's life. Sorcerers accept the laws of creation, but Maram had deprived Nellie of this privilege. Now, the favorite disciple and daughter of the witch had become a follower of a new god. Nellie asked if Maram remembered what she had said to her before she died, that she wanted the girl to live a happy life and not dwell on the past. Maram lowered her head. She remembered those words very well, but it was painful to recall those events. The girl admitted that she was unable to fulfill the will of her witch master. The witch said that, as the girl's master, she was obliged to return Maram to the true path, and she was not going to give up this time, even if it meant her own death. Nellie quickly rushed to attack Beige, and the hall was illuminated by a bright light so intense that Maram had to cover her face. The attack was so strong that the wolf flew a great distance and disappeared in a powerful explosion. Despite this, within seconds, Beige reappeared in Nellie's view, spitting saliva in all directions and launching another attack. Realizing that conventional physical attacks were not effective on the enemy, Nellie decided to use magic. She generated fire. The first blow made Beige jump to the side, but the witch was not going to stop there. She attacked the monster again and again, but the wolf was nimble enough to avoid each successive blow. At one point, Beige's paw came close to the witch's face, and she saw the mechanisms inside. Nellie decided not to waste any time. She rushed at the wolf and stabbed its paw with her sword. The blade pierced easily and cracked the surface. Beige growled loudly, in pain, stunning everyone present. For the first time, the wolf was wounded. Nellie leapt back to the group of adventurers and landed in front of them with ease. Beige turned toward the witch and opened his mouth, generating hellish flames. The witch managed to generate a protective shield, behind which the whole team of friends hid. The fire scorched half the hall, but Nellie's shield held firm. Abe was stunned. In his opinion, the robot witch was an unrivaled warrior, but he stopped mid-sentence as he saw that the shell in which Nellie's soul was kept had begun to crack. The witch said this was the #1 forbidden technique, called I am the family of destruction. This technique had once been the last to be invented, but its essence remained quite simple. The witch's level would continue to rise until she died. At that moment, the witch had already damaged the mechanism of this wolf cub, and its ability would no longer work. It was difficult to resist an enemy who was constantly increasing her level in exchange for her life. Now Nellie's life would finally come to its logical conclusion. The witch said that in the last moments of her life, she would teach Maram a lesson, one that the girl would remember forever. Nellie declared that she would deal with the wolf cub herself, and Abe and Helen had to stop Maram. The boy shouted that he understood and ran forward, Helen hurrying after him. Both adventurers attacked the girl, leaving her no room to maneuver. Maram's attention was focused on her witchmaster. She had never worried about anyone in her life as much as she did about Nellie. The witch said that every masterpiece has its flaws, which meant they would definitely be able to defeat this wolf. The witch saw Lindsay running toward Bashan from the other side, and Lindsay shared Nellie's conviction. She was not going to sit idly by. Lindsay activated her lightning strike skill, Thunderbolt, and slashed her sword at Bashan's paw. The wolf howled in pain. This wound was even worse than the previous one. The whole hall was illuminated by lightning. The impact was so strong that Lindsay herself was unable to remain standing. The blast wave threw her back. She fell to the ground, but even then she could not take her eyes off her opponent. The witch praised Lindsay for her effort and said that now it was time to deliver the final blow. Bash, struggling to breathe and with saliva dripping from his mouth, was preparing for the next attack. Abe and Helen blocked Maram, and the boy ordered her to stand still and watch. The powerful witch added that Maram should watch how she would destroy the wolf and how Timothy would save the whole world. Maram was seriously scared, but she didn't know what to say to stop this madness. After this final blow, the witch would finally be able to become truly free, something she had longed for over many years. Nellie's last words became the catalyst for Maram to finally move. She screamed, begging the witch to stop. Maram shouted that if the witchmaster died now, she would have no reason to live at all. The witch told the girl not to talk nonsense. She had saved her as a baby. She had given the rescued child a beautiful name so that she could live a happy life. Now, as a master witch, she was obliged to save Maram from the evil that had taken residence in her soul. The witch was going to finally deal with the wolf cub, Basha, using her fist alone. Nellie rushed into the attack and generated a powerful energy blast, and Bash disappeared. At its epicenter, the shockwave rapidly spread in concentric circles throughout the hall. Soon, the remains of the columns in the hall's decorations began to fly around the room. Finally, Nellie looked back at Maram and said that she sincerely asked the girl to give this world another chance. Maram's eyes flashed back to her childhood with the Witchmaster, a woman who had made her life truly happy. The powerful explosion drowned out all the girl's screams, but the tears that appeared in her eyes did not. When Timothy ran up to the door of the main hall, he felt his level recover again, as if he had left the energy field. Gritting his teeth, Timothy vowed that, for the sake of all his friends, he would stop Damon and his wicked plan. The guy abruptly opened the door and shouted Damon's name, ready for a fight. In the main hall, Damon was sitting on the edge of a giant torch. He said that it was a shame the guy was late, smiling a predatory smile. The sorcerer added that the preparations for the birth of the new god were already complete. Finally, the new god of this world would be here. Damon was very proud of his work and did not hide it. The sorcerer jumped down from the torch to the ground. His curiosity piqued. Although his friend's attempt had been unsuccessful, did Timothy still want to challenge him? A second later, he raised his right hand and called on his guard, asking it to let sinful people know suffering. The giant cocoon began to form over Damon's head. The sorcerer shouted for Timothy to tremble before the greatness of the new god. When the cocoon with the newborn was finally generated, the sorcerer lowered his hand and laughed. A couple of seconds later, giant arms burst out from different sides of the cocoon, and Timothy was terrified by the size of the monster. Damon shouted for the boy to look carefully. Before him stood the true god of their sinful world, the god of pain and suffering, the abyss of evil. The sorcerer declared that what he had been preparing for years had finally come to pass. A new god had been born into the world. He shouted that he was the most important loyal subject and was ready to obey any wish of the deity. The boy was glorifying the god. The cocoon collapsed further, and parts of the new god's body began to fall to the ground. The sorcerer fell silent. Timothy was also disgusted by the sight and did not understand why the god had become so shapeless. Damon shouted that he was doing everything right and did not understand why the result was so bad. The only reason could be that he did not have enough blood. He mentioned that the formation of the crystal was a problematic job. Was it because of the lack of blood to heal the crystal that his ritual failed? Before Timothy could even blink, a powerful explosion occurred right in front of him. When the fire and smoke dissipated, he saw giant hands that began to move. Gradually, the amorphous mass lying on the ground began to rise and take clear outlines. The god of pain and suffering, the abyss of evil, had been born. I looked at the screen and couldn't believe it because I saw that this giant creature was at level 100. The god of pain and suffering said that, due to an imperfect forbidden technique, his body had become like this, shapeless, rotten, full of flaws and ugly. But it was not catastrophic. Even with this body, the abyss of evil could plunge the world into the abyss of despair. Unexpectedly, Damon responded to this remark, shouting that everything was correct. The ritual did not go according to plan, but he had a solution. He invited the god of pain and suffering to take advantage of him and use him as a shell. If the god merged with him into one, together they would be able to overcome all these miserable people. But Damon was not destined to enjoy his triumph, as one of the giant hands suddenly pushed him into a concrete wall. The god of pain and suffering replied that he could handle everything without the help of a miserable worm. He did not need Damon. The sorcerer could barely catch his breath, but he was still alive, slowly getting to his feet. Suddenly, as if he had lost his mind, Damon shouted at the god, insisting that he did not dare to say such things to him. He insisted that he was the most loyal subject of the abyss of evil and did not understand what his role in the destruction of the world was. God replied that he had been honored to revive him in this world and that Damon should be proud of it. He called the sorcerer a miserable creature. These words made Damon very angry. He activated several forbidden techniques at once, and the energy that escaped from him was very powerful. Damon shouted that, in that case, he himself would show the god of pain and suffering his imperfection before people. The guy rushed to attack, but God said that no mortal was worthy to touch the face of God and activated purification. Instantly, Damon found himself in one of the giant hands of the abyss of evil. The sorcerer did not even realize how it happened. The abyss of evil said that he was, after all, the god of pain and suffering, and as his faithful follower he would grant the sorcerer his mercy. Damon shouted that he disagreed. His plan was to sow pain with the deity. He believed he did not deserve such a punishment. God replied that all mortals are equal before him, and that was why he would give Damon something extremely beautiful. After he said that, Damon began to scream very loudly as if thousands of spears were stabbing into his body at the same time. Promised, he let Damon's body fall to the ground, and the boy became significantly changed. Bloody crystals began to sprout through the sorcerer's body, and Damon screamed that he was in excruciating pain. He begged God to stop this torture, but he did not respond. In the end, the sorcerer simply shouted that he should be killed. The god of pain and suffering answered that he does not give his followers death, but only suffering. One of the crystals sprouted through Damon's eye, and he screamed in pain even louder. It was impossible to watch the sorcerer's torment. Timothy, who was standing next to the boy, reasoned that Damon, as an adherent of the forbidden techniques, was not suffering in vain. Considering all the atrocities that this sorcerer had committed, he got what he deserved 100-fold. But the guy still decided to show him mercy. He pulled out his sword and stabbed Damon in the back. The sorcerer fell to the floor and didn't move anymore. The system notified him that the leveling ban was lifted. Damon Foun was the creator of the ban technique, and therefore, after his death, this technique disappeared. The guy ordered the system to raise his level to the maximum value, as he needed everything he had to kill God. According to the abyss of evil, these actions were in vain, and no human being could defeat the deity. Suddenly, several of the hands of the god of pain and suffering fell off and hit the floor. Timothy felt disgusted. In his opinion, such miserable trash did not deserve to be called God. The main hall of the Melem was illuminated by a bright light. The system said that Damon's level was absorbed. The vault was at 500 and the total level was 7 tuin. The system also recommended a skill and a weapon to defeat God. The skill cost nothing and the sword cost 400 levels. After reading the descriptions, Timothy realized that divine ascension and divine eclipse were what he needed. The boy was confused that the skill was worthless. Meanwhile, God said that in his perfect likeness he was a horror who brought pain and suffering to people. Timothy rushed into the abyss of evil, deciding to deal with what was bothering him later as he had things to do. But the god of pain and suffering was not asleep either, and decided to counterattack. The guy barely managed to dodge the giant hand. The system notified him that the request for divine ascension was not mandatory, but the request for divine eclipse had to be approved. The guy coordinated all the nuances with the system and received a sword that could kill God himself. Timothy hit the god of pain and suffering on one of his arms, and it seemed that his attack this time was successful. Despite the significant difference in their levels, the guy managed to deprive the abyss of evil of a little bit of arrogance. With this sword, the boy could cut the flesh of the god of pain and suffering into small pieces. If the abyss of evil liked pain and suffering so much, the boy was willing to give it to him in its original state. The abyss of evil replied that this was a waste of time. A person would never attain the power that would be sufficient to kill a deity. People are created to glorify the gods, and the gods in turn give them their mercy or cruelty, and the opposite is not true. Timothy, standing in front of the bloodthirsty monster, calmly replied that they could check it out now. The abyss of evil said that the wretched stinker who dared to seduce the body of God should be severely punished. The god of pain and suffering added that the boy was not his follower but only an ordinary sinner, and people like him must be destroyed by the god of pain and suffering in this world. This time, Timothy had a hard time, barely managing to dodge the deity's attacks. He understood well that although God's body was rotten to the point where it would be easy to overcome him, his power was too great. The abyss of evil only had to hit the guy once, and he would immediately be dead. Unexpectedly, the system informed Timothy that the enemy's level had dropped, and the current level of the god of pain and suffering was 1. Continuing to run away, Timothy asked the system why the level of the abyss of evil had suddenly dropped. The system answered that the hand the guy had cut off contained fragments of a bloody crystal. It turns out that it is the blood crystal that gives the god of pain and suffering such enormous power. Fragments of the crystal are located throughout his body. If Timothy cuts off the parts where the fragments are located, the level of the enemy will decrease significantly. The guy looked at his enemy and finally had a plan on how to defeat this disgusting creature. Timothy asked if he needed to cut off the parts of the god's body where the crystals were visible to lower the enemy's level, and the system answered in the affirmative. Timothy flew at top speed to one of the monster's arms and swung his sword at it. After a moment, the arm separated from the body and the system reported a decrease in the enemy's level. The guy was not going to stop. After performing several combinations, Timothy managed to lower the deity's level even further and realized that he had just a little bit more to go. But the god of pain and suffering decided to be proactive and attacked Timothy with both hands. The boy managed to dodge at the last second. The boy seemed to have figured out how to weaken the divine power. However, the guy's efforts were in vain, and it was time to accept his punishment as a sinner. The god of pain and suffering promised to destroy the boy because sinful people like him had no right to live in his world. The abyss of evil activated its power and directed it directly at Timothy, and the boy realized that this time he would not be able to dodge. Timothy reasoned that although he had weakened the enemy, it was not enough, so the adventurer would really die. Timothy realized that he had no choice. He laughed in the face of the abyss of evil. He could not destroy it. The guy turned to the system and ordered it to open the vault and provide him with all the levels that were stored there. When the fire from the attack dissipated, the god of pain and suffering saw that the guy was still alive, and this surprised him greatly. Timothy absorbed the levels, and the system notified him that there were no more levels left in the vault, and the current level was 910. Timothy realized that he was running out of time and that madness was just around the corner, so he immediately attacked the enemy on the spot. The adventurer simply radiated a dark force around him. He screamed in pain and rage. A second later, the system notified him that the enemy's level had dropped, and Timothy struck again. The god of pain and suffering said that the sinner was trying to reach the power of God and for no reason had fallen into the fury of the beast. The abyss of evil considered such behavior disgusting and was not going to tolerate such treatment. The deity decided to attack the enemy, but no matter how hard the abyss of evil tried to grab the boy, he deftly escaped his grasp. On the way, Timothy still managed to strike after strike, reducing the enemy's level. The system notified him that the enemy's level had decreased and the level of the abyss of evil was now 1. In a moment, the level of the god of pain and suffering dropped again and was already 1140. Timothy systematically and methodically chopped off almost all of the vile deity's arms. The abyss of evil roared with pain and rage. Not wanting to give the creature a chance to survive, Timothy quickly ran up to the enemy and stabbed him in the body with his sword. The system notified him of the enemy's level reduction. The current level of the god of pain and suffering was 950. Timothy managed to bounce back from the enemy's counterattack in time, but something was starting to go wrong. The guy felt his thoughts were confused and his body was turning inside out from the pain. His consciousness was so clouded that Timothy could not understand what was happening to him and had little control over himself. The enemy took advantage of this. The system issued a warning: the wielder had reached his physical limit, and if he continued the fight, he would cause irreparable damage to his body. Timothy felt as if he had been short-circuited. He could not see anything around him. His brain was focused on the superhuman suffering he was experiencing. The guy realized that he had to do something, but he couldn't remember what exactly. God said that the sinner had given in to his original desires and that only death could cleanse him of his filth. Meanwhile, the darkness around the adventurer grew darker and darker, and he tried to remember what he had to do. Suddenly, Timothy thought it might be the end of him, but he heard the voices of his friends calling his name. Babe shouted that the boy shouldn't let this force consume him. He should hear his friends' voices. Lindsay shouted at Timothy not to give up, only he could defeat this monster. Even Lyall was worried about him, and the man said that Timothy needed to remember who he was. Surprisingly, the words of his friends made him remember something. Timothy remembered their names, and then he remembered something else. The guy recalled that he had asked the abyssal armor to release all levels from the storage. This enormous force consumed his mind, but for now, the guy was able to rise above the pain he felt. With enormous willpower, he had a purpose. Timothy bent down and picked up his sword. He ordered the armor to calculate how much time his body had left. The system replied that the guy could only make one shot. Timothy liked this answer. Timothy was sure that one blow would be enough for him. The god of pain and suffering was surprised that the boy had been able to regain consciousness. He said that in that case, the adventurer would have to prove to him which of them was stronger. He called the boy to him, saying that mortals have never been able to kill God. It is a taboo and no one could break this rule. The god of pain and suffering wanted to resolve all these issues here and now, as soon as possible. Timothy studied the properties of the sword, which concentrated divine energy that could be released with a powerful explosion. It takes a minute to recover the energy for a punch, and the boy wondered if he could use the wings of seraphim. At that moment, he realized that he couldn't use another sword during recovery, but the guy had no other choice anyway, so he had to attack. Timothy realized that he would have to end it all in one fell swoop. He began to gather the energy of the Lord's punishment. God said that no matter how much power a mortal has, it will always be insufficient to kill him. He raised his remaining arms and made